The temperature in Garlow, Montana had dropped to 11 degrees by 7 o'clock on Christmas night, and Emma Voss was sitting on a concrete bench in the town square with her two children pressed against her sides and three garbage bags at her feet. She wasn't crying. That was the part that might have broken anyone watching. She had gone past crying. Her 9-year-old daughter Marisol was pretending to count the lights on the frozen fountain, and her 6-year-old son Declan had fallen asleep against Emma's arm with his mouth slightly open, one glove missing, his breath making small clouds in the dark. Emma had $43 in her coat pocket, no job, and no place to sleep. She had spent the last 4 hours making phone calls that went nowhere. The woman who had saved 17 lives in one shift at Harwick Medical Center was sitting in the snow with nowhere left to go. Before we go any further, if this story already has your attention, please subscribe and hit the like button. Drop the name of your city in the comments below so I can see how far this story travels. Now let's get into it. Emma Voss had not planned to be sitting on that bench. 3 weeks ago, she had a job, a rented house on Clement Street, and a routine that held her life in shape even when everything inside her was fraying. She worked the overnight trauma floor at Harwick Medical Center, which was the only private hospital in Garlow and the largest employer in a county that had been slowly bleeding jobs for a decade. She had worked there for 6 years. She knew every code protocol, every supply cabinet, every nurse on every shift rotation. She knew which attending physicians operated on 3 hours of sleep and which residents needed to be watched. She knew the building the way you only learn a place when you have spent years inside it in the dark. Her husband, Patrick, had died 14 months before. Cardiac arrest at 38, no warning, no history. She had been at work when it happened. She didn't find out until she got home in the morning and found her neighbor, Mrs. Tron, sitting on the front porch with Marisol in her lap, which was how Emma learned that some things don't announce themselves. She had managed. That was the word she used when people asked. Managed. She paid the bills on time, she kept Declan in his soccer league, she showed up to every one of Marisol's school concerts, even when she was running on 4 hours of sleep. She worked double shifts when she could get them, and she did not let her performance slip because she understood, in a way that no one needed to explain to her, that the moment she gave the hospital any reason to question her, they would use it. She had not been wrong about that. She just hadn't understood the reason would be manufactured. Director of Operations Marcus Pruitt had been with Harwick Medical for 9 years. He had a corner office on the 4th floor with a window that looked out over the parking structure, and he had a habit of calling nurses by the wrong names until the moment he needed something from them. Emma had dealt with him across 6 years the way you deal with weather. You noted it. You worked around it. You did not waste energy on it. What she had not known, what she could not have known, was that 11 weeks before Christmas, during a surge admission night when the trauma floor was running at 190% capacity, a post-surgical patient named Gerald Fowler had developed a pulmonary complication that the attending physician on duty, Dr. Raymond Alst, had failed to properly evaluate. Emma had flagged the deterioration twice in the chart notes, had called Alst twice, had documented both calls. Alst had dismissed her both times. Gerald Fowler had been moved to a step-down unit and was found unresponsive 4 hours later. He survived, but barely, and the family had filed a formal complaint with the medical board. Marcus Pruitt's response to that complaint was immediate and quiet and very, very deliberate. Emma found out what was happening the way you find out most bad things. Not all at once, but in pieces. First, it was a message from HR requesting a documentation review. Then a meeting she was told was routine. Then a second meeting with legal present, which was not routine, during which she was informed that concerns had been raised about her conduct on the night of Gerald Fowler's deterioration. She asked what concerns. The HR manager, a woman named Doris Hazel, who never looked directly at anyone, slid a single sheet of paper across the table and said the hospital had received a statement from Dr. Alst indicating that Emma had failed to communicate patient status changes in a timely manner. Since Emma sat with that sentence for a moment. "That's not what happened," she said. Doris Hazel looked at the table. "I have 2 calls logged in the chart, time-stamped. I flagged the patient twice." The attorney present, a man Emma had never seen before, said, "We're aware of the chart entries. There are some questions about the sequence of events." "What questions?" Nobody answered that. She was placed on administrative leave the next morning. She received the notification by email at 6:47 a.m. while she was packing Declan's lunch. She read it 3 times. Then she finished making the lunch, walked Declan to the bus stop, and stood on the sidewalk in the cold for 11 minutes before she went back inside. The leave lasted 9 days. At the end of those 9 days, she was called into another meeting, and this time Marcus Pruitt was present. He sat at the head of the table in a jacket that cost more than Emma's bi-weekly paycheck, and he expressed, with visible regret, that the hospital's internal review had concluded that performance deficiencies had contributed to the adverse outcome in the Fowler case. He used the phrase "contributed to" 4 times. He never used her name unless he had to. Her nursing license was not revoked. The hospital couldn't do that, not yet. But her employment was terminated effective immediately, and the termination was coded in a way that would flag every background check any future employer ran. She would effectively be locked out of hospital employment in Montana without a legal fight she did not have the money or the energy to wage. She asked to see the internal review documentation. Pruitt said that was a matter for legal counsel to handle. She asked what specifically Dr. Alst had stated in his complaint. Pruitt said that information was confidential. She asked if anyone had looked at the chart timestamps. He said, "Emma, I understand this is difficult." She picked up her bag, stood up, and walked out. She did not cry in front of any of them. She waited until she was in her car in the parking structure, where she sat for 22 minutes with her hands in her lap and her forehead against the steering wheel, and then she drove home. What followed those 9 days was the specific kind of collapse that happens when everything that held a structure up gets removed at once. She couldn't make December rent without the paycheck. She depleted what little savings remained during the 14 months since Patrick died. She called 2 legal aid offices and was told the wait time for case intake was 12 to 16 weeks. She applied to 2 clinics and an urgent care group and received no response, because the background check flag was already in the system and no one in a small medical community would touch a nurse flagged for a patient safety incident without a full investigation behind it. The landlord gave her 30 days, which became 20, which became 12, which became the morning of December 24th, when Emma loaded what she could into garbage bags and borrowed her neighbor's car to return the keys and drive her children to the town square because she didn't know what else to do. She had tried calling her sister in Billings. The call went to voicemail and stayed there. She had tried a shelter, but the one in Garlow was full, and the next closest was in Dressler, 40 miles away, and she had no car and $43. So she sat on the bench and she did not cry, and Marisol counted the lights on the frozen fountain, and Declan slept against her arm. The dog appeared before she noticed the man. It was a large German shepherd, older, moving with the kind of careful economy that dogs develop when they've spent years learning to read terrain. It came around the side of the fountain, stopped about 6 feet from the bench, and looked at Declan with its ears slightly forward. Not aggressive. Alert, like it was cataloging something. "Ranger," the voice came from behind Emma. "Easy." She turned. The man was tall. Not performance tall, just built like someone who had spent years doing actual work in difficult conditions. He was wearing a dark canvas jacket, work boots, and he walked with a slight asymmetry that Emma's nurse brain registered automatically as a compensated left hip injury. He looked to be in his late 30s. There was a short scar that ran along the left side of his jaw and disappeared under the collar of his jacket, and his face had the particular quality of someone who had learned to observe situations before entering them. He looked at the garbage bags, then at Emma, then at the children, then back at Emma. "Sorry about him," he said, nodding toward the dog. "He has opinions about who he stops for." "It's fine," Emma said. He didn't move on. Most people would have moved on. The dog sat down next to Declan's foot, and the man crossed his arms loosely and looked at the square, not at Emma, not in a way that felt like assessment. "Town's emptied out," he said. "Everything closed by 4. "Yeah." "You waiting on someone?" Emma looked at Marisol. "No." He absorbed that without turning it into anything. He didn't ask a follow-up question. He just stood there for a moment in the way that people stand when they're deciding something. "My name's Cole Maddox," he said. "I've got a house about 6 blocks from here. It's warm, there's food, and I don't need anything from you in exchange for either of those things. That's the whole offer." Emma looked at him. She'd been a trauma nurse for 6 years. She'd triaged people in the worst moments of their lives, and she had learned something in those years that they didn't teach in nursing school, which was that you could usually tell the difference between someone performing decency and someone operating from it. She couldn't explain how she knew. Something in the specificity of the offer. Not, "Do you need help?" Not, "Is everything okay?" Just a warm house and food, stated plainly, no performance around it. "I don't know you," she said. "No," he agreed. "You don't." "I have 2 kids." "I noticed." She looked at the dog, who had not moved from beside Declan's foot. "What's wrong with his hip?" Cole blinked. "His hip? He's favoring his left rear. Old injury or chronic?" A pause. "Old. IED, overseas, same incident that got my left side." She nodded slowly. "What branch?" "Navy, SEAL teams, retired." Marisol had stopped counting lights and was watching the dog with the particular focus of a 9-year-old who has decided she wants something. The dog seemed to know it. Its tail moved once, unhurried. Emma looked at her daughter, then at Declan, still asleep against her arm, then at the $43 she could feel through the fabric of her coat pocket. 6 blocks, she said. 6 blocks. She stood up. Cole Maddox's house was a 2-story craftsman on Aldrin Street that looked like it had been empty for a while before he moved back into it. There were boxes still stacked in the front room, and the furniture was sparse in the way of someone who had not yet decided what permanence looked like. But the heat worked, and there was food in the refrigerator, and there was a couch big enough for both children to sleep on, with the 2 extra blankets Cole pulled from a closet without being asked. He made soup. Not from a can. He actually made it, standing at the stove with his jacket off, moving with the same deliberate economy as the dog. Emma sat at the kitchen table with her hands around a cup of coffee and watched him and tried to figure out what she was feeling. Not gratitude yet. Something more cautious than that. The place where gratitude would grow once she was sure this was real. Marisol ate 2 bowls. Declan woke up long enough to eat half a bowl and drink some water, then fell asleep again on the couch, with Ranger stretched out on the floor beside him like he'd been assigned. Cole sat across from Emma after the kids were settled and put a glass of water in front of her because the coffee was gone. "You don't have to explain anything tonight," he said. "I know. But I'm not going to pretend I didn't notice the bags." Emma wrapped both hands around the water glass. "I got fired 3 weeks ago. The hospital I worked at. I'm a nurse. Was a nurse. I still have my license, technically, but—" She stopped. "It's complicated." "Which hospital?" "Harwick." Something shifted in his expression. Not much, just a small compression around the eyes. "You know it?" she asked. "I know someone who had a bad experience there. Different situation." He didn't elaborate. "What happened?" She told him the short version. She was used to telling the short version by now. She'd had to tell it enough times to legal aid intake people and clinic HR managers who lost interest by the second paragraph. A patient deteriorated. The attending missed it. She documented everything. They blamed her anyway. Cole listened without interrupting, which was rarer than it should have been. "They have your chart documentation?" he asked when she finished. "Harwick has it. I have copies I printed before I left, but who was the attending?" "Dr. Raymond Alst." Cole was quiet for a moment. He turned his water glass in a slow circle on the table. "And Pruitt ran the internal review?" "How do you know Pruitt?" "Small county," he said. "His name comes up." Emma studied him. "What does that mean?" "It means I've been back in Garlow for 4 months, and I've heard his name in 3 different conversations that all ended the same way. Someone got squeezed out, and Pruitt was the mechanism." He paused. "It's not the first time he's done this." Emma set her glass down. "Who else?" "A woman named Adela Foss, physical therapist. She flagged a billing discrepancy 2 years ago and was terminated within the month. Before her there was a lab tech whose name I don't know, but the pattern's the same." He looked at her directly. "The hospital has a system for making problems disappear. You're not the first problem." The warmth of the kitchen suddenly felt very specific against the cold she'd been sitting in for hours, and Emma felt something she hadn't felt in weeks. Not hope exactly, but the particular sharpening that happens when scattered pieces suddenly suggest a shape. "What do you do now?" she asked. "Since you retired." "Security consulting. Some investigative work. I'm licensed in Montana." "That's convenient." "Not convenient," he said. "It's what I know how to do." He leaned forward slightly. "Those chart copies you mentioned, you still have them?" "In one of the bags." He nodded. "Get some sleep. Tomorrow we look at what you have." Emma didn't sleep well. She lay on the air mattress Cole had set up in the back room and stared at the ceiling and listened to the house settle and thought about Pruitt's face in that last meeting. The specific texture of his regret, which was not regret at all but a performance of it, calibrated to be just plausible enough to close the room. She thought about Gerald Fowler, who had nearly died because Raymond Alst didn't want to re-examine a patient at midnight. She thought about the 2 chart entries she'd made, time-stamped, clear, and she thought about the fact that somewhere in Harwick's system, those entries still existed and could not be unmade, no matter what Pruitt had told his legal team. She got up at 6:30 because lying down felt worse than moving. Cole was already in the kitchen with coffee made and a yellow legal pad on the table. Ranger was at his feet. The morning was gray through the window, snow coming down lightly, and Emma sat across from him and pulled the legal pad toward her. "Talk me through the night in sequence," he said. "Everything." She talked for an hour and a half. Cole wrote in small, precise handwriting. Not shorthand, just compressed, covering the page efficiently. He asked questions at specific intervals, not to redirect, but to pin down exact times, exact language, exact names. He was the most methodical listener she had encountered outside a courtroom. When she finished, he sat back and looked at the pad for a moment. "Alst's license," he said. "Has he had prior complaints?" "I don't know." "I do." He turned the legal pad and pointed to a line near the top. "I pulled his public record this morning. There were 2 prior complaints filed with the Montana Board of Medical Examiners. One in 2019, one in 2021. Both dismissed without investigation because the hospital submitted supporting documentation. Pruitt's signature is on both submissions." Emma stared at the line. "He's done this before," Cole said. "Specifically this written hospital documentation that insulated Alst from board review, which means Harwick has a pattern of protecting this specific physician at the expense of whoever raised the flag." He tapped the pad. "You're not a negligence case. You're a liability suppression case. There's a difference, and it matters." "Matters to who? I still don't have a job or a place to live." "It matters to the medical board," he said, "and to the county DA if the suppression is sufficient to constitute fraud." He looked at her evenly. "But I need more than chart copies. I need to know if Alst altered documentation after the event, and I need to know who else at Harwick knows what happened." Emma thought for a moment. "There's another nurse, Petra Sorel. She was on the floor that night. She saw me make the second call. Will she talk?" "She has a family, a mortgage." Emma exhaled. "I don't know." "That's an honest answer." He stood up and refilled his coffee. "I'm not asking you to force anyone into anything. I'm asking you to let me do the part that's mine to do. You focus on keeping steady for your kids." Marisol appeared in the kitchen doorway in her socks, hair tangled, looking at Ranger with absolute intent. The dog lifted its head. "Can I pet him?" she asked. "Ask Ranger," Cole said. Marisol looked at the dog. The dog's tail thumped once against the floor. She crossed the room and sat down next to him and put her hand on his head with the gravity of a 9-year-old conducting important business. Emma watched her daughter and felt the specific fragility of that moment, how quickly things could have gone differently last night, how close the other version of this morning was, the one where they were in the cold with nowhere to be. She picked up her coffee. "What's your background?" she asked. "Specifically, not just Navy." "Special operations. 15 years. Intelligence component for the last 6. He sat back down. "The part where you track things, reconstruct events, figure out what someone is hiding and where they put it. And you think Pruitt is hiding something specific?" "I think Pruitt is protecting something specific, which is his arrangement with Alst, which has probably kept a fair amount of money and liability off the hospital's books for years." He looked at his legal pad. "I think there's documentation of that arrangement somewhere in Harwick's system, and I think if we find it, your chart copies become the anchor for a case the board can't dismiss." Emma was quiet for a moment. Outside, the snow had picked up, coming down in dense, steady curtains across the gray morning. Christmas. She had completely forgotten, for a stretch, that it was Christmas. "I don't have money to pay you," she said. "I know." "Then why?" "Because I was sitting on that bench 6 blocks away 2 years before you were," he said. Not dramatically, just a statement of fact. Different bench, different city, but the same feeling. He met her eyes. "Someone made me an offer. No strings. I'm returning it to the universe or whatever." Emma nodded once. Okay, she said. What do we do first? First, we find Petra Sorrell. Petra Sorrell had not left Harwick without her own damage. Emma found that out within the first 2 minutes of the phone call she made from Cole's kitchen that afternoon, while Cole sat across the table and listened without making it feel like listening. Petra answered on the third ring, which Emma hadn't expected. She'd prepared herself for voicemail. Emma! Petra's voice had the particular flatness of someone who had been carrying something for weeks. I know you've heard what happened, Emma said. Everyone's heard. A pause. I heard Pruitt's version, which is... She stopped. Which is what? Which is not what I saw that night. Emma felt Cole shift slightly across the table. Petra, I need to know if you'd be willing to speak to someone about what you observed. Not a reporter, not yet. Someone who's building a case for the medical board. Silence on the line. 15 seconds of it. I have 2 kids, Emma. I know. And a mortgage I'm already behind on. I know. I'm not asking you to do something that puts your family at risk. I'm asking you to tell the truth to someone who can use it in the right way, at the right time, with protections in place. Another silence. Longer this time. Who is this person? Petra asked. Emma looked at Cole. His name is Cole Maddox. He's ex-military. He's done investigative work. He's not connected to Harwick or to anyone who is. Is he connected to the family? The Fowlers? No. A breath on the line. All-S changed the chart, Emma, after the event. I saw the original. I saw what it said at 11:15 p.m., and I saw what it said the next morning, and they were not the same document. The kitchen went very still. Petra, Emma said carefully. Did you document that? I took a photograph of the screen at 11:15. I didn't know why at the time. Something felt wrong, and I had my phone. She paused. I still have it. Cole had stopped writing. He was looking at Emma with the particular expression of someone who has just found the thread that unravels a coat. Emma kept her voice steady. Can we meet tomorrow? Not at a restaurant, Petra said. Not anywhere I can be seen talking to you. Cole's house, Emma said. It's private, just us. A long pause. Send me the address, Petra said, and hung up. Emma set the phone on the table. Declan had come in from the living room at some point during the call and was sitting on the floor next to Ranger with a piece of paper he was folding into something. Marisol was in the doorway again. Cole was looking at Emma. She has a photograph, Emma said. I heard. A time-stamped photograph of the original chart entry before it was changed. I know what it means. Emma put her hands flat on the table. Her knuckles were white against the wood. 6 weeks of being told she couldn't prove anything, that her word meant nothing against the hospital's documentation, that the internal review was final and the chart was the chart. And somewhere on Petra Sorrell's phone was a JPEG that turned all of it into a lie. Pruitt is going to find out she has it, Emma said, at some point. If we start making moves, he'll hear about it and he'll go after her. He's going to move faster than he expects, Cole said. He was pulling something up on his laptop. She could see he'd had it open behind her, positioned so she couldn't see the screen during the call. Because I submitted a public records request to the Montana Board of Medical Examiners this morning for the full file on both prior Alst complaints, including the supporting documentation Harwick submitted. Once that request hits their system, anyone watching for activity on those files will know someone is looking. Emma stared at him. You already started. I started when you told me your name last night. He turned the laptop so she could see. The board's public records portal was open. The request filed at 7:14 a.m. I needed to know whether you were telling the truth before I told you what I was doing. You are, so now you know. Emma looked at the screen for a long moment. Then she looked at Cole Maddox. This man she had known for less than 24 hours, sitting in his half-unpacked house on Christmas morning, who had filed a government records request at 7 in the morning because he'd already decided. What happens when Pruitt realizes the board is being asked about Alst's history? She said. Cole closed the laptop. He panics. And people who panic make mistakes. He paused. Or they try to shut things down before the mistake is made. Which means we need Petra's photograph secured and documented before he has a chance to figure out what we have. Tomorrow morning, he agreed. Declan held up the piece of paper he'd been folding. It was a dog, roughly. Ranger examined it with his nose and then looked away with the restrained dignity of a retired military animal who had seen combat and was not going to pretend a paper dog was interesting. Declan looked at Cole. His name is Ranger? It is. Like a Power Ranger?
Like a park ranger, Cole said. But he can be either one.
Declan considered this with enormous seriousness and then nodded like this was acceptable information. He held the paper dog out to Ranger. Ranger sniffed it once and then laid his chin on Declan's knee. Emma watched her son's face break into a grin that she hadn't seen in 6 weeks, and she felt something move in her chest that she couldn't name. Not yet, not quite. She looked back at Cole. What if the board request triggers something tonight, she said. What if Pruitt has someone watching the system and he knows by morning? Cole looked at her steadily. Then tonight I make some additional calls. People I know in this state who have been waiting for a reason to ask harder questions about Harwick. He paused. I'm not the only person who's been paying attention to that hospital. I'm just the one who finally has a witness. He said it quietly, without emphasis, like it was simply the next sentence in a plan that had already been set in motion before Emma Voss arrived in his kitchen. Emma held his gaze. What did you do for 15 years, she said. In the Navy, specifically. He looked at her for a moment before he answered. I found things people didn't want found, he said, and then I made sure the right people knew about them. He stood and went to the counter to refill his coffee. Ranger lifted his head as Cole moved and then settled it back down on Declan's knee. The snow was still coming down beyond the kitchen window, heavy now, accumulating, turning the street into something quiet and white and clean. Inside the house it was warm. Somewhere across town, in his 4th-floor office at Harwick Medical Center, Marcus Pruitt's desk phone was ringing. He didn't know it yet, but the call was going to be the first thing that went wrong. Marcus Pruitt did not answer the phone that night. He let it ring through to voicemail, the way powerful men do when they've decided that whoever is calling isn't important enough to interrupt their evening. It was Christmas, after all. He was at his brother-in-law's house in the hills above Garlow with a glass of scotch and a fire, and the comfortable insulation of a man who has spent years making sure consequences land on other people. The call was from the hospital's compliance officer, a nervous, meticulous man named Stuart Brigg, who left a message in the careful, clipped language of someone who has learned not to say too much on recordings. The message said only that there had been an inquiry to the medical board and that Stuart thought Marcus should know before the holiday weekend was over. Pruitt listened to the message the next morning, standing in his kitchen in his bathrobe, coffee in hand, and felt a slow, measured irritation move through him. Not alarm, not yet. He had weathered board inquiries before. He had, in fact, designed his documentation specifically to weather them. He finished his coffee, showered, dressed, and drove to the hospital because he was the kind of man who responded to inconveniences in person. He did not know that by the time he reached his 4th-floor office, Cole Maddox had already been in contact with 2 people who had been watching Harwick Medical Center for reasons that had nothing to do with Emma Voss. Petra Sorrell arrived at Cole's house at 9:15 the next morning with a wool hat pulled low and a canvas bag over one shoulder and the look of someone who had not slept. She stood on the porch for a moment before she knocked, and Emma, who had been watching for her from the front window, opened the door before her knuckles made contact with the wood. "Come in," Emma said. Petra came inside and stood in the entryway and looked at Cole the way people look at someone they've decided to evaluate before speaking. Cole was in the kitchen doorway, with his arms loose at his sides and Ranger sitting just behind his left leg. "You're the investigator," Petra said. "I'm the person who's going to make sure what you know reaches the right people," Cole said. "Which is different." Petra pulled her hat off. She was 41, mixed Filipina and Montanan in a way that made her face difficult to read in dim light, and she had worked the trauma floor at Harwick for 9 years. She'd been passed over for charge nurse twice. She knew exactly how that building worked. "If Pruitt finds out I was here," she started. "He won't," Cole said. "Not from anything that comes out of this room." "You can't promise that." "I can promise that your photograph gets documented and preserved through channels that are legally required to protect the source." He paused. "I can't promise Pruitt won't eventually know someone gave us something, but by the time he figures that out, the documentation will already be with the board and it won't matter." Petra looked at Emma. Emma held her gaze and said nothing,
because she understood that Petra didn't need reassurance from her. She needed to make her own decision. Petra reached into her bag and took out her phone. The photograph was exactly what she'd described. Time-stamped 11:17 p.m., showing Gerald Fowler's patient chart on the Harwick system. The observation notes section, clearly legible, showing Emma's 2 entries documenting the patient's deteriorating vitals and her 2 calls to Dr. Alst. The second call note read, "Physician contacted at 22:43. Patient status communicated in full. Physician declined to reassess at this time. Monitoring to continue Q15 per nursing judgment." Cole looked at the photograph for a long moment. Then he looked at the version of the chart that Harwick's legal team had produced during Emma's termination review, which Emma had photographed during the meeting when the attorney stepped out to take a call. In that version, the second nurse's note was absent. The observation at 22:43 did not exist. What remained was a truncated record that made it appear Emma had noted initial concern and then stopped documenting, suggesting she had let the situation slide rather than escalated it. "They deleted a chart entry," Cole said. It wasn't a question. "They deleted the entry that proved Alst was told," Emma said. Cole pulled a portable scanner from the shelf behind him, the kind that folds flat, used for document work, and connected it to his laptop. "I'm going to digitize both images, embed metadata, and file them with a secure legal repository before noon. The repository issues a time-stamped receipt that's admissible as evidence of original content." He looked at Petra. "Your phone stays yours, the image stays yours. We file the documentation, not the device." Petra exhaled slowly. "What does the board do with this?" "Opens a formal investigation," Cole said, "which triggers mandatory disclosure. Harwick has to produce the full original chart file, including access logs. Access logs will show who opened the record and when. If Alst or someone acting for him modified that chart, the log will show the access. It's automatic. The hospital can't suppress it once the board compels disclosure." "And if they've already altered the logs?" Emma asked. "Access logs in a HIPAA-compliant system are immutable. You can't edit them without triggering a compliance violation that generates its own audit trail." He looked at her. "They can't clean this up. They could only have hoped no one was looking. We're looking." Petra sat down in the kitchen chair Emma offered and wrapped both hands around the coffee Emma poured her and was quiet for a moment. "He knew," she said finally. Emma looked at her. "Who knew what?" "Alst. He knew by the next morning that you'd documented the calls. I was at the nurse's station when he came onto the floor, before 7, which was unusual for him. He went straight to a terminal and logged into the chart system. I remember thinking it was odd because he never reviewed overnight charts himself. That's what residents are for." She looked at the table. "He was on that terminal for 11 minutes. I noted it because his behavior was different. Then he left without speaking to anyone." The kitchen was quiet for a moment. Outside, Garlow was gray and still, the snow from Christmas packed into the gutters. "You'd make a good witness," Cole said to Petra. Not a compliment, an assessment. Petra looked at him. "I can't testify, not formally, not yet." "I know, but when you're ready, and I think you will be before this is done, what you just told me is what breaks Alst's version of events." He paused. "He walked onto that floor at 6:50 a.m. specifically to find and remove that entry. The photograph you took at 11:17 the night before is the record of what was there before he got to it." Petra looked at Emma. There was something in her face that was not quite guilt and not quite grief. Something in between. The expression of a person who has been holding a weight they shouldn't have had to hold alone. "I'm sorry," Petra said. "I should have come forward sooner. When they announced your termination—" "You have a family," Emma said. "I understand. It's not an excuse." "No," Emma agreed, "but it's a reason. There's a difference." She reached across the table and touched Petra's hand once, briefly. "You're here now." Cole had the documentation filed by 11:40 a.m. The legal repository confirmation came back at 12:03, and he printed it and slid the page across the table to Emma, without ceremony. She looked at it. A string of numbers and a timestamp and a verification hash that she didn't fully understand, but that Cole said made the digital record unimpeachable. "Now we wait?" she asked. "Now I make 2 calls," he said, "and then we wait." He went into the back room with his phone.
Emma heard the low cadence of his voice, but not the words, which was fine. She sat with Petra at the kitchen table and drank cold coffee, and they talked in the low, careful way that two people talk when they've spent years working the same floor and never had the time to actually know each other. Petra left at 1:30 with her hat back on, moving quickly down the porch steps and up the sidewalk without looking back. Marisol and Declan were in the front room watching something on Cole's laptop, and Ranger was asleep in the hallway in a patch of thin winter sunlight. Cole came back to the kitchen and sat down. "The two calls," Emma said. "First one was to a woman named Iris Delacroix. She's a former public health investigator who's been tracking Harwick's billing patterns for a county oversight committee. She's been building a case for 8 months, and she's been missing a clinical incident to anchor it." He paused. "She now has one." "And the second?" "Former colleague. He works intelligence for the state AG's office now. White-collar unit." He picked up his water glass. "He's been aware of Harwick informally for a while. The Alice complaint history was already on his radar. What he didn't have was a documented instance of chart manipulation, which is what turns a billing inquiry into a criminal referral." Emma stared at him. "You've been building toward this." "I've been paying attention," he said. "Which is different. I didn't have a case, I had observations. You walked into my kitchen with the case." "I didn't walk into your kitchen. You found me on a bench in 11-degree weather." "Details," he said, and there was something that might have been the beginning of a smile at the corner of his mouth before it settled back into its usual composure. Emma thought for a moment. "How fast does this move now?" "The board will acknowledge the records request within 5 business days. The holiday slows that, so realistically we're looking at the first week of January. Once they acknowledge, they have 30 days to compel disclosure from Harwick." He leaned back. "But the AG's office moves on its own timeline, and they don't announce. If my contact decides this is worth opening a formal inquiry, Pruitt may not know about it until someone shows up with questions. And Pruitt doesn't know what we have yet. He knows the board was asked about Alst's complaint history. He doesn't know about Petra's photograph. He doesn't know about the documentation filing." Cole looked at her evenly. "He thinks this is a disgruntled nurse trying to fight a termination through official channels. He's handled that before and won. He's not treating this as a threat yet." "When does that change?" "When the board's compelled disclosure request hits Harwick's legal team. At that point, they'll know someone has more than a complaint. They'll start trying to figure out what we have and who gave it to us." He paused. "That's the window where things can get complicated." Emma nodded slowly. She understood complicated. She had spent the last 3 weeks in a version of complicated that had ended with her children on a bench in the snow. "What do we do in that window?" she asked. "We secure everyone who knows anything," Cole said. "And we make sure the record is already so far out of Pruitt's reach that there's nothing left for him to suppress." The week between Christmas and New Year's had a specific quality in Garlow, a suspended, between-things stillness, where the government offices were half-staffed and the streets stayed quiet, and everyone seemed to be waiting for the year to tip over and become something else. Emma spent those days in a kind of focused suspension of her own. She was sleeping in Cole's back room. The children were adapting with the particular resilience of kids who understand that the adults are working on something without needing to know the specifics. And Ranger had appointed himself Declan's shadow in a way that seemed to satisfy some deep purpose in the dog that his retirement had left unfulfilled. Cole worked methodically. He was up before 6 every morning with coffee and his laptop, assembling documentation in layers, medical board filings, correspondence with Iris Delacroix, a timeline of the Harwick incidents that he was building from public records and Petra's account. He asked Emma questions at regular intervals, not all at once, spacing them out so she could retrieve the accurate details rather than the compressed version she'd been telling for weeks. On the 28th, he came to the kitchen table at 3 in the afternoon with a different expression than his usual operating face, and Emma, who had learned to read the small calibrations of his composure in the way you learn to read a room you spend a lot of time in, looked up immediately. "What happened?" she said. "Iris Delacroix got a call from someone inside Harwick this morning." He set his laptop on the table so she could see. "Billing department, junior analyst named Wen Ferris. She's been at the hospital 14 months, and she's been aware of an irregularity in the insurance coding on Raymond Alst's surgical cases for the last 6 of those months." Emma scanned the screen. "Upcoding?" "Systematic upcoding. Alst has been coding routine procedures at a complexity level that triggers higher reimbursements.
It's not enormous per case, but across 2 years of cases it adds up to something in the range of $300,000 in improper claims. He paused. The hospital knows. Pruitt approved a review 18 months ago and then closed it without action. Emma sat back. So the billing fraud is real. It's real, and it's documented in Harwick's own system, when Ferris has records. He looked at Emma. She called Iris because she heard, through the kind of hospital grapevine that travels faster than Wi-Fi, that someone was asking questions about Alst. She wanted to know if she could provide information without losing her job. Can she? Iris has a whistleblower protection mechanism through the county oversight framework. It's not perfect, but it creates an official record that she disclosed under protected status, which makes retaliating against her significantly riskier for Harwick. He closed the laptop. We now have 3 independent sources: Petra's chart photograph, Wen Ferris's billing records, and your own documentation. Emma looked at the table. 3 weeks ago, she had $43 and a termination code that was locking her out of her career. Now there were 3 sources: a medical board inquiry, an AG contact, and a county oversight investigator, all moving on different tracks toward the same building. It's a lot, she said. It's what a real case looks like, Cole said. It's never one thing. It's a structure. You build it until it holds weight. Emma was quiet for a moment. Then she said, what does Pruitt do when he finds out Wen talked to Iris? Cole was quiet for a beat longer than usual. That's the part I'm watching, he said. Pruitt found out on the 30th. Emma didn't know how. Cole suspected someone inside Iris's committee, a low-level staffer who passed information sideways for reasons that were probably petty rather than corrupt. But the result was the same. By mid-afternoon on the 30th, Harwick's legal team had filed a preemptive response with the medical board characterizing the records request as part of a coordinated campaign of defamation by a terminated employee. The filing named Emma specifically. It described her as having a demonstrated pattern of antagonistic behavior toward hospital administration, and included a signed statement from Raymond Alst asserting that Emma had been verbally abusive to him on the night in question. Cole read the filing aloud to Emma at the kitchen table, and she listened without moving. When he finished, she said, verbally abusive. That's what it says. I called him twice, and he dismissed me twice, and I documented both calls and walked away. I know. I have never been verbally abusive to anyone on a clinical floor in my life. I know. He set the document down. This is the escalation. He knows someone is building something, he doesn't know how much, and he's trying to get ahead of it by establishing your character as the issue rather than the facts. It's working, Emma said. That filing is public. It's public, but it's also a mistake. He looked at her. He's overcommitted now. He filed a statement from Alst claiming abuse. If Petra's photograph surfaces, and it will, that statement is not just wrong, it's a coordinated lie in a medical board proceeding. That's perjury exposure. Emma pushed back from the table and stood up. She needed to move. She walked to the window and looked at the street for a moment. The snow, the bare trees, the houses with their Christmas lights still up, blinking slowly in the late afternoon gray. He's trying to erase me again, she said. He's trying, Cole said. He's done it before and it's worked before, and he thinks it'll work again because he doesn't know what we have. He paused. But Emma, he made one critical error in that filing. She turned around. He named you specifically, Cole said. By name, with a specific allegation, in a formal board proceeding. That gives you legal standing to respond formally, and to compel the board to compare the allegation against the documented evidence. He looked at her steadily. You just gave us the mechanism we needed to get Petra's photograph in front of the board with full procedural weight. Emma stood at the window for a moment. The afternoon light was going fast, the way it did in Montana in late December, the sky compressing into a narrow band of pewter above the roofline before going dark. When? She asked. I can file the formal response with supporting documentation by January 2nd, Cole said. The board hearing calendar opens the second week of January. She nodded. She turned back to the window. Marisol has school starting the 8th, she said. Declan has a dentist appointment on the 15th that I already rescheduled twice. She stopped. I need to find a place to live before then. We'll figure that out, Cole said. You keep saying we. Because it keeps being accurate. She looked at him over her shoulder. He was looking at the document on the table, not at her, which was probably why she felt like she could look at him the way she did. Not performing anything, just looking. The spare house, the legal pad, the dog in the hallway. This man who had spent 15 years finding things people didn't want found, living in a half-unpacked house in Garlow, Montana, who had offered a warm room and food on Christmas night for no reason he had fully explained. "Why Garlow?" she asked. "Out of everywhere." He was quiet for a moment. "I grew up here," he said. "Left at 18. Spent 15 years not thinking about it." He turned his water glass on the table. "My father died in October, left me the house. I came back to deal with the estate and then..." He stopped. "Stayed." "That's it?" "There's a version with more detail," he said. "But that's the accurate short version." Emma turned back to the window. Declan was in the front yard with Ranger. She could see them through the glass, Declan throwing a stick into the snow and Ranger retrieving it with patient dignity, over and over. Her phone rang. She looked at the screen. Unknown number, Montana area code. She answered. "Is this Emma Voss?" The voice was male, professional, brisk, not aggressive, just very precise. "Who's asking?" "My name is Daniel Graft. I'm a senior investigator with the Montana Attorney General's Office, White Collar Crimes Division." A pause. "I understand you've been in contact with a former special operations officer named Cole Maddox." Emma looked across the kitchen at Cole. He had gone very still. "I have," she said carefully. "Ms. Voss, I'd like to schedule a meeting with you and Mr. Maddox at your earliest convenience. We have some questions about Harwick Medical Center that I think you're in a position to help us answer." Another pause, shorter. "And I think we may be in a position to help you." Emma kept her voice level. "When?" "January 2nd, Graft said. "If that works?" "It works," Emma said. She hung up and looked at Cole. "Your contact," she said. "My contact," he confirmed. "He didn't wait for the board." "No," Cole said. He looked like he was recalibrating something internally. "Which means the AG's office has more on Harwick than I knew. Enough to move on its own timeline without waiting for the board to compel disclosure." Emma set her phone on the table. "That's good." "That's very good," Cole said. "But it also means Pruitt is now in the middle of something significantly larger than a nursing termination dispute. And when he finds that out..." His own phone buzzed on the table. He looked at the screen. Something in his face shifted. A quick, tight compression that Emma had not seen before. "What is it?" she said. He turned the phone so she could see. It was a text from a number he had saved under a single initial, P. Petra. The message read, "Someone came to my house an hour ago asking questions about you. Said they were from Hospital Legal. They knew I'd been in contact with you. I don't know how. I didn't say anything, but Emma, they know." Emma read it twice. Cole was already on his feet. Cole was already calling Petra before Emma finished reading the message a second time. She answered on the first ring, which meant she was holding the phone. "Are you inside?" Cole said. "Not hello. Oh, not are you okay? Just the operational question." "Yes. I locked the door when they left." "They left on their own, or you asked them to leave?" "They left when I said I had nothing to say without a lawyer present." Her voice was tight but controlled. "They showed ID. Harwick Legal, a woman named Sonia Pruitt, no relation, different spelling, and a man who didn't give his name. They said they were conducting an internal review of employee communications, and they knew I'd been in contact with you, Emma. They didn't say how." Cole looked at Emma across the kitchen. Emma was already thinking through the geometry of it. Who knew Petra had called? Who could have connected those dots? The phone call had been made from Cole's kitchen on Emma's phone. Cole's house wasn't a secret. He'd lived here 4 months. Neighbors knew his name. "Did they threaten you?" Cole asked. "Not directly. The woman said that employees who participate in external defamation campaigns against the hospital may be subject to employment consequences." A pause. "I still work there, Cole. I went back after Christmas on a different floor. I needed the income." "I know." He sat down. "Petra, I need you to not say anything else to them. Not a word. If they come back, you say lawyer and you close the door. Can you do that?" "Yes." "Is your husband home?" "He will be in an hour." "Good. Don't be alone tonight." He paused. "The photograph. It's already documented. They can't touch what's already filed. But I need to know, Is there anything on your phone, in your email, in any communication system they could access that shows what you gave us? A silence. Petra. I texted Emma the morning after Christmas, she said, just to ask how the kids were doing. It was a normal text. That's fine. Anything about the photograph, the chart? No, nothing in writing. Good. Keep it that way. We're meeting with the AG's office on January 2nd. By the time that meeting is over, Harwick's leverage over you will be significantly reduced. He said it with the flat certainty of someone describing weather. Hold until then. He hung up and set the phone on the table. Emma looked at him. They found out about Petra. They found out she was in contact with you. They don't know what she gave us. If they knew about the photograph, they wouldn't have sent 2 people to her door to ask questions. They'd have gone straight to their legal team to figure out how to suppress it. He turned his water glass on the table, a habit Emma had noticed he defaulted to when he was processing. What they're doing is fishing, trying to map out how much exposure they have. Which means they're scared. Which means Pruitt is scared, Cole said. Pruitt specifically, because the board inquiry named his approval of the Alst complaint response, and the AG contact told me that Pruitt's name has appeared in their preliminary review of the billing irregularities. He looked at her. This is starting to look less like a hospital covering for a physician and more like a director who has been personally profiting from a systematic arrangement, which is a different order of problem. Emma sat down. The kitchen felt smaller than it had an hour ago, the walls closer. She understood what he was saying. A hospital covering its liability was one thing. Institutional, diffuse, driven by insurance and reputation. A director with personal financial exposure was something else. That kind of man didn't stop at sending lawyers to a nurse's front door. What does he do next? She asked. If I were him, Cole said, I'd try to discredit the sources before the AG meeting. Create a paper trail that makes Petra look motivated by a personal grievance, that makes you look unstable, that makes any documentation we have look contaminated. He paused. He's had a week to think about this. He's not an idiot. He's going to move before January 2nd. How do we stop him from moving? Cole looked at her for a moment. We don't stop him. We let him move, and we make sure that when he does, he moves into something that makes it worse for him. New Year's Eve in Garlow was quiet, in the way of small towns that have learned not to expect much from celebrations. Emma sat with Cole at the kitchen table after the children were in bed, and they went through the documentation file together, every piece, in order, the way you walk a route before you run it. Cole had organized it into 3 categories: chart manipulation, billing fraud, and termination procedural violations. Each category had a primary document and supporting materials, and each primary document had a chain of custody notation that connected it to its source in a way that would survive legal challenge. Emma read through her own section, the termination procedure, and stopped at a paragraph she hadn't seen before. What's this? She turned the page toward Cole. He looked at it. That's from the Montana Nurse Practice Act, specifically the section covering employer obligations during adverse action proceedings against licensed nurses. He leaned forward and pointed to a line. Harwick was required to notify the state nursing board within 30 days of initiating your termination because the termination was coded as being related to patient safety. They didn't. Emma stared at the line. They didn't notify the nursing board. They were supposed to. It's not optional. It's a mandatory reporting requirement. If they notify, the board opens a concurrent review, which means independent eyes on the same incident. Harwick didn't notify because independent eyes were the last thing Pruitt wanted. He sat back. That's a separate violation. Procedural, not clinical, but it matters because it shows the termination wasn't just unfair. It was conducted outside the legal framework for exactly this type of case. Which means the termination itself is legally defective, Emma said slowly. Which means a lawyer could argue it should be treated as if it never happened, Cole said. Which affects the background check flag. Which affects your ability to work. Emma set the page down. Outside, somewhere a few streets away, someone was setting off early fireworks. Small amateur things, popping and fading in the dark. Declan would sleep through anything. Marisol would be awake, watching from the window of the back room with the specific wonder of a 9-year-old who finds everything worth looking at. You found this today? Emma asked. Yesterday. I wanted to verify it before I told you. Why verify it? Either they notified the board or they didn't. Because I wanted to check the nursing board's records directly, not just assume. The board maintains a public log of adverse action notifications. Harwick's name isn't in it for the relevant period. He looked at her. I verified it. Emma nodded slowly. She was doing the arithmetic in her head: chart manipulation, billing fraud, failure to notify the nursing board. 3 separate categories of wrongdoing, 3 separate regulatory bodies, 3 separate exposure vectors for Pruitt and for Harwick. Any one of them was a problem. All 3 together, converging in the same week, with an AG investigator already in the picture. This is bigger than me, Emma said. It was always bigger than you, Cole said. You were just the most visible piece of it because you were the one they needed to blame. She thought about Gerald Fowler, who had survived but barely. She thought about the prior Alst complaints in 2019 and 2021, both dismissed because Pruitt submitted documentation. She thought about how many other patients there might have been, complications that got coded away, families that were told something went wrong without being told why, nurses who had flagged concerns and been ignored and eventually left or been pushed out. How many people has Alst hurt? She said. Cole was quiet for a moment. I don't know yet. Iris Delacroix is looking at the billing records across his full case history. The patterns in billing sometimes mirror the patterns in outcomes. Cases that were upcoded to a higher complexity tier may have had complications that were also mishandled. He looked at the table. We might not know the full scope for months. But the people it happened to don't have what you have, he said, which is why this matters. The case you're building isn't just about your job. It's about closing the system that made it possible for this to keep happening. Emma was quiet for a long time. The fireworks down the street had stopped. The house was still. Ranger was asleep in the hallway, his slow breathing the only sound. I want to be a nurse again, she said. Not with self-pity, just as a fact that needed to be in the room. I want to go back to a floor and take care of patients. That's what I'm good at, and it's what I want to do. Everything else, the board, the AG, Pruitt, I need it to be over because I need to get back to work. Cole nodded. January 2nd, he said. That's the next fixed point. Let's get there. January 2nd arrived cold and overcast, and Cole drove them to a state office building in the county seat of Dresser in a truck that had seen Montana winters before and handled them without drama. Emma sat in the passenger seat with the documentation file in her lap. Marisol and Declan were with Petra's husband. Petra had offered without being asked, which told Emma something about the shift that had happened between them. The AG's office occupied the 3rd floor of a building that smelled like industrial carpet and old coffee, and Daniel Graft was waiting for them in a conference room with a female colleague he introduced as Specialist Avery Koss, Financial Crimes. Graft was 53, slightly overweight, with the organized, unhurried manner of someone who had conducted hundreds of these meetings and knew exactly which details mattered. Koss was younger, 30s, and had a laptop open before they sat down. Thank you for coming in, Graff said, which was the only social opening he made before moving to business. Mr. Maddox, you and I have spoken. Ms. Voss, I've read the documentation you've provided through Cole's filing. I want to go through it today in detail, and I want to understand the chain of events from your perspective as the primary witness. I'm not just a witness, Emma said. I'm the person whose career was destroyed to hide this. Graft looked at her without blinking. Yes, he said. I'm aware of the distinction. I'm also aware that it matters legally. He opened a folder. Let's start with the night of November 14th. They went through it for 2.5 hours. Graft asked with the same precision Cole had. Specific times, specific language, specific names, and Koss typed without looking up, and occasionally asked financial questions that Emma couldn't answer, but Cole could partially address from the billing documentation Iris Delacroix had shared. At one point, Graft produced a document Emma hadn't seen before, a printout from a database she didn't recognize, and slid it across the table. Do you know this name? He asked. Emma looked at the page. It showed a Nevada LLC registered in 2019. The registered agent was a name she didn't know, but listed as a secondary contact was Raymond Alst. I know who Alst is, she said. This LLC received payments from a healthcare consulting group that has a contractual relationship with Harwick Medical Center, Graft said. The payments correspond in timing to Harwick's insurance reimbursements on Alst's high-complexity cases. Not all of them. A selection. He paused. The selection matches cases where billing was elevated above what the documented procedure would typically support. Emma looked at Cole. Cole was looking at the document with the expression of someone confirming something he had half expected. Alice was getting a cut, Emma said. We believe so, Graff said. We're in the preliminary stage of confirming the full structure, but the pattern is consistent. He took the document back. Here's what I can tell you. The AG's office has opened a formal investigation into Harwick Medical Center. It encompasses billing fraud, potential Medicare and Medicaid false claims, and what we believe may be a pattern of deliberate adverse action against employees who presented risk of exposure. He looked at Emma directly. Your case is the clearest documented instance of that last category, which makes you the central witness in a proceeding that is significantly larger than a nurse's termination dispute. What does that mean for my license? Emma asked. My background check flag. Graft and Koss exchanged a look. We can issue a formal notice to the Montana Nursing Board today, indicating that you are a protected witness in an active investigation and that the adverse action coding in your termination record is under review as part of that investigation. That notice effectively suspends the flag's operational impact pending resolution. He paused. It's not a full reinstatement, but it means any employer who runs your background check will see the notice, not just the flag. Emma felt something shift in her chest, a specific pressure that had been constant for weeks moving, slightly, the way a joint releases when the inflammation starts to go down. Not gone, just different. When? She said. End of business today, Koss said without looking up from her laptop. They were back in Garlow by 2 in the afternoon. Cole drove with both hands on the wheel and didn't fill the silence, which Emma appreciated because she needed the 40 minutes to sit with what had happened in that conference room without narrating it to herself. She had walked in as a terminated nurse with a documentation file. She had walked out as the central witness in a state AG investigation. Those were not the same thing, and the distance between them was real and mattered, but she understood. In the way she understood clinical situations, by reading the pattern rather than waiting for someone to explain it, that the investigation made her visible in a new way that was not entirely safe. Pruitt would find out. He would find out soon because the AG's investigation would require Harwick to receive formal notice, which would go to their legal team, which would reach Pruitt within hours of that letter landing. And when it did, he would understand that whatever he had been protecting was now under examination by people who had subpoena power and a financial crime specialist with a laptop full of LLC records. She said as much to Cole when he pulled into the driveway. I know, he said. He sat with the engine off for a moment. He's going to do something. The question is what? Can Graff protect us if he does something? The AG's office can issue witness protection protocols if there's credible threat, Cole said. But those take time to set up, and Pruitt is more likely to go after the case than after the people. He turned to look at her. His most effective move right now is to attack the documentation. Try to establish that Petra's photograph is fabricated, that the chain of custody is broken, that there's a coordinated conspiracy against the hospital driven by a personal vendetta. He paused. He'll need someone to make that argument publicly, someone with standing. His lawyer, Emma said, or Alst himself. If Alst files a formal countercomplaint with the medical board against you, citing the abuse allegation from his earlier statement, it forces the board to conduct a parallel review that could slow down the primary inquiry. He got out of the truck. It's a stall tactic, but stall tactics work when the other side runs out of resources to sustain the fight. Emma got out and stood in the cold driveway. The sky was low and white, the kind of January sky that promised more snow by evening. I'm not running out, she said. Cole looked at her over the roof of the truck. I know. They went inside. Ranger met them at the door with his ears forward and his tail moving once, twice, then settling. Petra's husband dropped the children off 20 minutes later, and Declan came in smelling like someone else's house. That specific visiting a friend smell of different soap and different food. And Marisol had a drawing she'd made at Petra's kitchen table that she wanted to put on Cole's refrigerator. Cole held it up. A house with snow on the roof and 4 figures in the yard, one of them clearly a dog. He looked at it for a moment. This okay? Marisol asked. Yeah, Cole said. This is okay. He taped it to the refrigerator. ALS filed the countercomplaint on January 5th. Cole found out from Graft, who called at 7:15 in the morning with the particular tone of someone delivering information they anticipated but still find irritating. Raymond Alst has submitted a formal complaint to the Montana Board of Medical Examiners, alleging that Emma Voss conducted a coordinated defamation campaign against him, including fabrication of clinical documentation and solicitation of false testimony from hospital staff. Graf's voice was even. He's represented by a firm out of Billings, Harwick's primary outside counsel. The complaint names Petra Sorrell by full name. Cole looked at Emma across the kitchen. She was already looking at him. Does the board have to act on it? Cole asked. They have to acknowledge it and open a review file. But because we've already filed the documentation with timestamp authentication, the board can't adjudicate the counter-complaint without first reviewing our submission, which means both proceedings are now in front of the same panel. A pause. That's actually useful for us. It forces a side-by-side review. And Petra? Being named in the complaint creates some exposure for her. It's a pressure tactic. Harwick's hoping she recants or refuses to cooperate in order to avoid being in the middle of a formal proceeding. Graf paused again. Ms. Voss should know. The board has scheduled a preliminary hearing for January 15th. Both complaints will be reviewed at the same session. She'll need to appear. Cole relayed this to Emma after he hung up. She was quiet for a moment. January 15th, she said. 10 days. 10 days. She nodded. She picked up her coffee, realized it was cold, set it back down. Petra's name is in Alst's complaint. Yes. She's going to find out. She already knows. Graf's office notified her this morning. He sat down across from Emma. She called me while you were still asleep. She's not recanting. She's angry. Something that almost satisfaction moved across his face. She asked if she could have the contact information for the AG's office directly. Emma looked at him. She's going to talk to them herself. She's going to walk into that building and give them everything, Cole said. Her own account, her photograph, the observation about Alst at the chart terminal, all of it, on record. He paused. Naming her in the complaint was the mistake. It stopped her from being a reluctant witness and made her a motivated one. Emma thought about Pruitt in his fourth-floor office, engineering this, the counter-complaint, the Billings law firm, the strategic naming of Petra, with the precise, practiced confidence of a man who had done this before and watched it work. She thought about how this looked from his end, a terminated nurse, a reluctant floor nurse, an investigator with no legal standing, all of them scrambling against a hospital's full legal apparatus. He thought he was winning. I need to call a lawyer, Emma said, for the hearing. I can't walk in there alone. You won't be alone, Cole said. But yes, you need counsel. He reached for his phone. I know someone. She does medical licensing defense. She owes me a conversation. Cole? She's good, he said. And she's been waiting for a Harwick case for 2 years. The lawyer's name was Renata Osei. She called Emma back within the hour and asked questions for 40 minutes in a rapid, focused style that reminded Emma of the best charge nurses she'd worked with. No wasted language, everything oriented toward the next decision. At the end of the call, Renata said she'd reviewed the documentation file Cole had sent her that morning, and she wanted to take the case. What's your retainer? Emma asked. Deferred, Renata said. We settle this in your favor. I take a percentage of any damages awarded. If we don't settle, we discuss. Emma asked why. Renata was quiet for 2 seconds. Because I read your chart documentation, and I read Alst's counter-complaint. And I've been in this profession long enough to know the difference between a nurse who made a mistake and a nurse who was set up. She paused. And because Harwick did this to 2 other people before you and I wasn't in a position to help them, I am now. The 10 days before the hearing had their own specific texture, not waiting exactly, but the sustained, effortful holding pattern of people who are in motion but can't yet see the finish. Cole spent most of it at his laptop and on the phone. Renata submitted a formal response to Alst's counter-complaint on January 8th. That was, according to Cole when he read it, methodical in the way that a controlled demolition is methodical, precise, sequential, and designed to leave nothing standing. Petra met with the AG's office on January 9th. She was there for 3 hours. Emma didn't ask for details because Graft had been clear that the witness interviews needed to stay separate, but when Petra texted that evening, it was 2 words, I'm good. Iris Delacroix submitted the billing analysis to the AG's formal record on January 10th, 47 pages covering 2 years of Alst's case coding, cross-referenced against insurance reimbursements and the Nevada LLC payment records. Cost called Cole to confirm receipt and said only, "This is comprehensive," which Cole told Emma was the equivalent of someone else saying it was devastating. Harwick's legal team filed 2 motions to delay the board hearing on January 11th and 12th. Both were denied. The board chair, a woman named Dr. Constance Vella, issued a terse 2-paragraph notice stating that the hearing would proceed as scheduled and that procedural delay motions would not be entertained in proceedings involving documented patient safety concerns. Emma read Dr. Vella's notice 3 times. On January 13th, Cole came to the kitchen at 11 at night. Emma was still up, reviewing her statement with Renata's edits marked in red pen, and sat down across from her with the particular expression she had learned to read as something happened. "What?" she said. He put his phone on the table. On the screen was a news article from the Garlow Courier's website, time-stamped 40 minutes ago. The headline read, "Harwick Medical Center under state investigation for billing irregularities, sources say." Emma looked up from the screen. "Someone at the AG's office leaked," Cole said, "or someone at Harwick leaked, trying to get ahead of the story. Either way, it's public now." She read the article. It was short and careful. Sources familiar with the investigation. No names except Harwick Medical Center, a brief mention of billing anomalies and a state inquiry. No mention of Emma. No mention of Alst. "This changes the hearing," Emma said. "It changes the public context of the hearing," Cole said. "The board can't conduct this in a quiet room anymore. There will be press. There will be attention." He paused. "Which makes it harder for anyone to quietly make this go away." Emma looked at the article again. "How does Pruitt respond to this?" Cole's phone buzzed on the table. He looked at the screen. It was graphed, texting rather than calling, which was unusual. The text read, "Heads up. Harwick just filed an emergency motion with the board to have the January 15th hearing closed to the public, citing patient privacy concerns. Motion was filed 20 minutes ago. Vella will rule tomorrow morning. Prepare for either outcome." Cole set the phone down and looked at Emma. "He's trying to close the room," Cole said. Emma felt the particular cold that was not temperature. A closed hearing meant no press, no observers, no public record beyond what the board chose to release. A closed hearing meant a room where Harwick's lawyers could perform without an audience, where the documentation could be disputed in private, where the pressure on the board to act was reduced to whatever internal professional ethic the members carried in with them. A closed hearing was the last viable mechanism Pruitt had left. "Can Vella deny it?" Emma asked. "She can. She has broad discretion." Cole's jaw tightened slightly. "But if Harwick argues patient privacy compellingly enough, she may feel she has to grant a partial closure." Emma looked at her statement on the table. The pages Renata had marked up, the clean version she'd been preparing, the specific language she'd rehearsed until it stopped sounding rehearsed. She thought about Pruitt filing that motion at 11 o'clock at night from wherever he was, his legal team burning through billable hours to seal a room. She thought about how many rooms had already been sealed, the internal review she never saw, the documentation that disappeared from the chart, the prior complaints that were dismissed, all of it happening in rooms where no one was watching. "What time does Vella rule, Bus?" Emma asked. Graft said morning. Cole looked at her. "We won't know until we know." Emma nodded slowly. She picked up her pen. "Then I keep preparing," she said. She bent back over the statement. Cole stayed at the table. Ranger came in from the hallway at some point and lay down near the table without being invited, which was his way of staying close without making it about himself. At 1:15 a.m., Emma's phone rang. She didn't recognize the number. "Montana area code, different exchange than Graff's office." She answered. The voice on the other end was male, older, with the specific roughness of someone who had spent decades in conditions that were hard on the throat. He said her name, Emma Voss, like he was confirming it rather than asking. "Yes," she said. "Who is this?" "My name is Gerald Fowler," the voice said. "I'm the patient from November, the one who—" He stopped, started again. "I heard what's happening with the hearing. My daughter showed me the article tonight." A pause. "I want to testify." Emma held the phone and did not move. "Ms. Voss," Gerald Fowler said, "I want to tell them what I know about that night, about what happened after, about what the hospital told my family about you." His voice held something that had been compressed for months and was finally being let out. "They told us you didn't respond, that you weren't monitoring properly, that the complication happened because of nursing failure." He stopped. "I want them to know that's not true. I don't know everything that happened, but I know that's not true. And I want to say so in that room." Emma stood up from the table. Cole was watching her. "Mr. Fowler," she said carefully, "how did you get this number?" "The article mentioned Cole Maddox by name," he said. "I found his number through the county investigator's license registry. He gave me yours." Emma looked at Cole. He raised one hand slightly, a gesture that said, "I know. I'll explain." "Mr. Fowler," Emma said, "I need to ask you something before anything else." She steadied her voice. "Did the hospital ever tell you there was a second evaluation, that someone flagged the concern twice before the transfer?" Silence on the line. "No," Gerald Fowler said. "They never told us that." Emma gripped the phone. "Then yes," she said. "I think you should be in that room." She hung up and looked at Cole, and her hands were not quite steady. "You gave him my number," she said. "I gave him the option," Cole said. "I didn't know if he'd call." "You knew he'd call." Cole was quiet for a moment. Then, "I thought there was a reasonable probability." Emma set the phone on the table. Gerald Fowler was going to walk into that hearing room. The man whose near death had been used to justify her destruction was going to stand up and say what the hospital had told his family, and then the board was going to compare that account against Harwick's internal documentation, and the distance between those two versions was going to be visible to everyone in the room, unless Pruitt succeeded in closing it. Emma looked at Cole. "If Vela grants the closure motion, she won't," Cole said. "You don't know that." "I know that at 7 this morning I sent Dr. Constance Vela's office a supplementary filing that included Gerald Fowler's contact information, his expressed willingness to testify, and a legal brief from Renata arguing that patient privacy grounds for closure cannot apply when the patient himself requests the proceeding be open." He paused. "Renata filed the brief at 6:50 a.m. Vela received it before Harwick's motion landed." Emma stared at him. "You knew Harwick was going to file the closure motion," she said slowly. "I knew they were out of moves except the last one," Cole said. "The closure motion was the last one." "How long have you known?" "Since Graff told me the article was coming out," he said. "I spent most of tonight on the phone with Renata working through the brief." He looked at her evenly. "I didn't tell you because you needed to focus on your statement. Your statement is what changes that room. Everything else is the frame around it." Emma sat down. She thought about Marcus Pruitt in his office at 11 p.m., filing emergency motions, running his legal team through the night, and the entire time Cole had already placed a countermove in Dr. Vela's inbox before the motion even arrived. "The hearing is in 36 hours, she said. 36 hours, Cole agreed. "And you actually think we're ready?" He looked at her for a moment. Something passed across his face that was not quite reassurance. It was more honest than that. "I think we've done everything that can be done," he said. "The rest of it is the room, and rooms are unpredictable." Emma nodded. She picked up her pen. Outside, snow had begun to fall again, the quiet, dense kind that accumulated fast and changed the look of everything by morning. 36 hours. In Harwick Medical Center's legal department, the phones were still ringing. And in a hospital room 3 counties over, Gerald Fowler was sitting up in bed dictating notes to his daughter about a night in November that he had never stopped thinking about. The night a nurse had fought for his life while the man responsible for his care chose not to answer the phone. And the night that had been quietly, carefully rewritten until the woman who saved him became the reason he nearly died. He was done being quiet about it. Gerald Fowler's daughter drove him 4 hours from his rehabilitation facility in Clement Falls to Garlow on the morning of January 15th, arriving at 7:40 a.m. in a blue sedan with a handicap placard and a thermos of coffee she'd made at 4 in the morning because her father had been awake since 3. Gerald was 61 and had the specific, deliberate movements of a man whose body had been through something significant and was still in negotiation with the aftermath. He walked with a cane now. Not permanently, the physical therapist said, but for the time being. And he wore a button-down shirt his daughter had pressed the night before because he had asked her to, and because she understood, without him explaining, that this was the kind of day a man wanted to look like himself for. Emma met them in the lobby of the Garlow County Professional Center, where the Montana Board of Medical Examiners held its regional hearings at 7:55. She had not known what to expect. She'd spoken to Gerald only once, by phone, and for less than 10 minutes. She expected someone diminished. What she found was someone who had been through a specific kind of fire and come out the other side with a very clear idea of what he wanted to say. He looked at her for a moment before either of them spoke. "You're shorter than I expected," he said. Emma blinked. "I'm 5'6". "I pictured someone taller." He said it without any particular logic, then extended his hand. "Gerald Fowler. This is my daughter, Wren." Wren Fowler was 33, dark-haired, and looked like she had been running on adrenaline since October. She shook Emma's hand and said, "Thank you for what you did that night." And Emma said, "I just documented what was happening." And Wren said, "That's exactly what I mean." Renata Osei arrived at 8:10 with a rolling briefcase and the specific, contained energy of a lawyer who has been up since 5 and is operating at full capacity anyway. She was 44, Ghanaian American, and she shook Gerald's hand for exactly the right amount of time and said, "Your testimony is voluntary. You can stop at any point. If anyone in that room makes you uncomfortable, you look at me." Gerald said, "Young lady, I sat in a hospital bed for 3 weeks and let them tell my family that a nurse screwed up my care. I am not going to be made uncomfortable by a boardroom." Renata looked at him for a moment. "Good," she said, and turned toward the elevator. Us. The hearing room was on the 4th floor, a long rectangular space with fluorescent lighting and a raised dais where 5 board members sat behind a shared table. Dr. Constance Vella occupied the center seat. She was 67, white-haired, and had the particular stillness of someone who had spent decades in rooms where people performed and had long since stopped being impressed by performance. Vella had denied Harwick's closure motion at 6:50 a.m. The denial was 2 sentences. The second sentence read, "The board finds no patient privacy basis for closure where the patient himself has requested an open proceeding." The room was not full. This was a regulatory hearing, not a trial. But there were observers. A reporter from the Garlow Courier sat in the back row with a notebook. Iris Delacroix was there from the County Oversight Committee. And Daniel Graft from the AG's office sat against the side wall with Avery Koss, not as participants but as observers whose presence in the room was itself a message to everyone who understood what their office did. Harwick's legal team occupied the table on the right side of the room. There were 3 of them. The lead attorney, a man named Franklin Burr, who was silver-haired and had the calculated composure of someone who had won a great many rooms, a junior associate, and a paralegal with 2 banker's boxes of materials. Marcus Pruitt sat beside Burr in a charcoal suit, and he looked, Emma thought when she came through the door and saw him, like a man performing calm. The performance was good, but she had spent years reading people in high-pressure situations, and she could see the difference between a man who was calm and a man who needed to appear to be. Raymond Alst was not present. Emma registered that immediately. He had submitted written testimony rather than appearing in person, which Renata had told her to expect, and which Renata had also told her was tactically significant. A physician who submits written testimony rather than appearing is a physician who has been advised by counsel not to be in a room where he can be questioned. Vella opened the session at 9 a.m. with procedural language that she delivered without looking at her notes, which suggested she had run enough of these to have internalized the framing. She summarized the 2 complaints before the board, Emma's documentation filing and Alst's counter-complaint, without editorializing, and she noted the presence of the AG's office observers and stated for the record that the board was operating independently of any concurrent criminal or civil investigation. Then she looked at Franklin Burr and said, "Counsel, your client filed a counter-complaint. You filed first this morning. You may proceed." Burr stood with the smooth, unhurried movement of a man who was used to being the most expensive person in the room. He began with a narrative of Harwick's position, the hospital's commitment to patient safety, its documented review process, its concern about the coordinated external pressure campaign that had been brought to bear against it. He used the phrase coordinated campaign 4 times in 8 minutes. He talked about Emma's emotional state following her husband's death. He talked about the stress of the nursing profession and the well-documented phenomenon of confirmation bias in clinical documentation. He talked about Alst's 14 years of practice and his record of patient outcomes. He did not talk about the chart timestamps. He did not talk about Petra Sorrell. He did not talk about the Nevada LLC. Emma sat at the left table with Renata beside her and kept her hands flat on the table and her face neutral. Beside her, she could feel Renata making small, almost imperceptible notations on her legal pad. Not the words Burr was saying, just marks that Emma eventually realized were tallies. Every claim Burr made that the documentation directly contradicted. When Burr sat down, Vela looked at Renata. Counsel for Ms. Voss. Renata stood. She was not a performer. That was the first thing Emma noticed when Renata began. She didn't have Burr's theatrical composure, the deliberate pauses, the modulated authority. She spoke at a business-like pace, and she organized her argument the way Cole organized documentation. In layers, each one resting on the one below it, built to hold weight. She started with the Nursing Board notification failure. She walked the board through the Montana Nurse Practice Act requirement, cited the specific statute number, and submitted the Nursing Board's own public log showing Harwick's absence from the mandatory reporting record. She said it took her 11 minutes to verify this. Then she moved to the chart documentation. She submitted both versions, the original, evidenced by Petra's time-stamped photograph, and the post-modification version produced during Emma's termination review. She placed them side by side on the document display and did not editorialize. She simply said, "The board is looking at two versions of the same record. One was created at 11:17 p.m. on November 14th by the treating nurse. The other was accessed the following morning at 6:52 a.m. by Dr. Alst, per the system access log the board received under its compelled disclosure order, and the nursing notation was removed. The access log is part of the board's own compelled record. It is not something we produced. It is something Harwick's own system generated." The room was very quiet. Burr objected to the characterization. Vela said, "The characterization is factual. The access log speaks for itself. Continue." Renata continued. She walked through Alst's two prior complaints, the 2019 and 2021 board filings, and submitted the Harwick documentation that had been used to dismiss them. Then she submitted a parallel analysis Iris Delacroix had prepared, showing that the clinical language in those supporting documents matched, at a structural level that exceeded coincidence, the language used in the documentation submitted during Emma's termination review. The same sentence constructions, the same framing of nurse error as a contributing factor in cases where physician response time was the operative variable. "This is a template," Renata said, "not a coincidence. It has been used 3 times in 3 separate board proceedings to insulate the same physician from review." Pruitt shifted in his seat. Emma did not look at him. Tick. The break came at 11:15. The board members stepped out, and the room divided into its natural halves. Harwick's team at the right table, heads down, Burr speaking in a low, tight voice to his associate, and Emma's side, where Renata reviewed her notes and Gerald Fowler sat in the front row of the observer section and drank from his daughter's thermos without being offered anything else. Cole was in the observer section, 4 seats from Gerald. He had been there since 9 and had not moved except to occasionally look at his phone. He looked at Emma when the break was called and gave her the small, specific nod that meant "you're doing fine" in the compressed vocabulary they'd developed over the past 3 weeks. Emma went to the water table in the corridor and stood there for a moment with a plastic cup she didn't drink from. Pruitt came out of the hearing room 2 minutes later. He didn't approach her. His lawyer would have told him not to. But he walked past her in the corridor, and for a fraction of a second their eyes met. And what Emma saw in his face was not the composed regret of the termination meeting. It was something colder and more calculating than regret. He was still running numbers, still looking for the play. She turned back toward the hearing room without speaking to him. The second half of the morning was Gerald Fowler's. Vela called him to the witness position, not a formal stand, just a chair that had been moved to face the dais. And he settled into it with his cane across his knees and his daughter in the front row of observers with the thermos in her lap. Vela explained his voluntary status, his right to stop at any point. Gerald said, "I understand. Let's go." He told the board what the hospital had told his family in the days after his deterioration. He was specific and clear about the language: nursing failure, inadequate monitoring, a nurse who had not followed escalation protocol. He said his family had believed it. He said he had partially believed it himself, until his daughter showed him a news article in early January, and he started asking questions he should have asked months before. He said, "I want to know what was in that chart." I want to know what I was told and what was actually true. Because right now I've been told two different things by two different sources, and only one of them comes with documentation. Burr cross-examined him carefully, limiting his questions to what Gerald could personally verify, which was, tactically, very little. Gerald had not seen the chart. He had not witnessed any clinical decision-making. He knew only what he had been told. "Then your testimony is hearsay," Burr said. "With respect, Mr. Fowler." Gerald looked at him for a moment. "My testimony is that a hospital told my family that a nurse failed me, and that nurse is sitting in this room with documentation that says the opposite. I'm not here to prove the documentation. I'm here to tell you what was done with my injury." He paused. "You decide what that means." Burr sat down. Vela made a note. The board broke for lunch at 12:30 and reconvened at 1:45. The afternoon session was supposed to address Alst's counter-complaint, the allegation of fabricated documentation and coordinated defamation. It did not go the way Burr had architected. Renata stood and submitted a single document, the legal repository confirmation from the Secure Filing Service, showing the timestamp of the original documentation submission as December 27th, 11 days before Alst filed his counter-complaint claiming the documentation was fabricated. The repository receipt included a cryptographic hash that could be independently verified by the board's own technical consultant. The documentation was filed and authenticated 11 days before it was alleged to be fabricated, Renata said. The fabrication claim is not only false, it is demonstrably false, using the tools the opposing complaint itself invited us to examine. The room absorbed this. Burr attempted a reframing. The question was not the filing date, but the underlying authenticity of the photograph, which could not be verified without forensic examination of the device. Renata submitted the affidavit from the digital forensics consultant she had retained on January 10th, who had examined a certified copy of Petra's photograph and verified that the metadata was consistent with original capture and showed no evidence of post-processing modification. Burr said the consultant's methodology should be examined. Vela said the board would review the affidavit and moved on. The afternoon had a different quality than the morning. The morning had been structured, arguments laid out, evidence submitted, the formal architecture of a proceeding. The afternoon felt like a building whose load-bearing walls were being examined one by one, and Harwick's legal team kept finding that each wall they pointed to was the one Renata had already addressed. At 3:10, Vela called a brief recess and then returned with a question she directed to Burr. "Counsel," she said, "the board's compelled disclosure of Harwick's chart access logs shows that the patient record in question was accessed by Dr. Alst's credentials at 6:52 a.m. on November 15th. The prior entry, documenting a second nursing contact and physician response at 22:43, is not present in the version of the chart your client produced during the termination review. The access log shows no other access between the nursing entry at 22:43 and Dr. Alst's 6:52 a.m. access." She paused. "Can you explain to this board how the entry disappeared?" Burr said, "The board should not draw conclusions from access log data without proper forensic context." Vela looked at him steadily. "I didn't ask for conclusions. I asked for an explanation." Burr said he would need to consult with his client. Vela said he had 30 minutes. The recess that followed had a different energy than the lunch break. Harwick's team disappeared into a side corridor. Cole appeared beside Emma in the hallway, Graff 3 steps behind him. "She's going to rule today," Graff said quietly. "Vela doesn't call recesses to let the other side consult unless she's already decided, and she wants them to know it before she announces." "What does that mean for the counter-complaint?" Emma asked. "The counter-complaint is done," Renata said, coming to stand beside her. "The fabrication allegation is demonstrably false, and the board knows it. What Vela is deciding now is what to do about the underlying facts, the chart modification, the prior complaint pattern, the termination procedure violations." She looked at Emma. "This is the part where what happens in that room is outside our control." Emma nodded. She understood outside our control. She had spent 6 weeks in outside our control. She was better at it now than she had been in December. Cole stood beside her and said nothing, which was what she needed. Gerald Fowler was at the end of the corridor with Wren, who had brought sandwiches from somewhere in a paper bag, which her father was eating without ceremony. He caught Emma's eye across the distance and gave her a small nod that had nothing performative in it, Just one person acknowledging another in a hallway, while something important was happening around them. When the board reconvened, Franklin Burr stood and said that Harwick Medical Center wished to revise its position on certain elements of the countercomplaint in light of the board's questions, and that the hospital was prepared to discuss a constructive path forward regarding Ms. Voss's termination record. Vela looked at him. Counsel, this board doesn't negotiate resolutions during proceedings. You may withdraw the countercomplaint, or you may not. What would you like to do? A silence. Burr said, The countercomplaint is withdrawn. The reporter in the back row wrote something in her notebook. Pruitt sat with his hands flat on the table and his face arranged into an expression that had stopped resembling anything natural. Vela turned to face forward. The board will take the remaining matters under formal advisement and issue a written determination within 10 business days. For the record, the matters include the original documentation complaint regarding the November 14th patient incident, the question of mandatory reporting compliance under the Montana Nurse Practice Act, and the access log anomaly in the patient chart record. She paused. The AG's office has indicated it will be in contact with the board separately. The board notes that presence. She looked at Emma. Ms. Voss, the notation in your employment record will be flagged as under active board review effective immediately. Any background verification queries will reflect that status. Emma said, Thank you. Vela closed her folder. We're adjourned. The exit took 20 minutes, documentation to sign, Renata organizing the physical record, Graf speaking briefly to Cole in the corridor in a low voice that Emma stayed out of because she understood it was operational, and she was too tired to process operations. Burr left quickly with his team. Pruitt left with them, pulling his coat on in the elevator lobby, not looking back. Emma watched him go. She had expected to feel something large when she saw him leave. Satisfaction, maybe, or the specific release of a weight that has been on you so long you forgot it was there. What she actually felt was smaller and more specific than that. The same feeling she got at the end of a long, hard shift when the last patient was stable and the chart was closed and she could finally sit down. Not triumph, just the acknowledgement that the thing had been done. She found Gerald in the lobby near the front doors, putting his coat on with Wren's help. Thank you, Emma said, for coming, for testifying. Gerald looked at her. I should have done it sooner. I should have asked more questions in October. He pulled his collar straight. I let them tell me a story because I was still sick and I didn't have the energy to challenge it. He paused. That's on me. You didn't know. No, but now I do. He picked up his cane. What happens to the hospital? The AG is investigating. The board is issuing a determination. It'll take time. Gerald nodded slowly. Al est, he said. Specifically, what happens to him? Emma met his eyes. I don't know yet, but the access log is in the board's record now. The board doesn't have a choice about what it does with that. He looked at her for a moment longer than was comfortable, not with hostility, just with the direct examination of a man who was deciding something. Then he nodded once, the way a person nods when they've confirmed something they thought was true. Good luck, he said. He and Wren went out through the front doors into the January cold and the gray Montana sky, and Emma watched the door close behind them and stood in the lobby for a moment alone. Cole appeared at her shoulder. He didn't say anything immediately. He just stood there the way he stood things. The contained, unhurried presence of someone who understood that some moments needed to settle before you added language to them. It's not over, Emma said. No. 10 business days for the determination, then whatever the AG does on their timeline. Yes. She looked at the door. Pruitt knows what's coming. He's known for a few days, Cole said. Since the article. He's been trying to control the timeline and he's run out of ways to do that. Emma thought about Pruitt in his charcoal suit, leaving the building without looking back. A man who had spent years making sure consequences landed on other people, walking out of a room where the consequences were being assembled and pointed at him. What does he do now? She said. Cole was quiet for a moment. That's what concerns me, he said. Men in his position, when the options narrow down to one, they either accept it or they try one more thing. He paused. Pruitt is not a man who accepts. What's the one more thing? I don't know yet. Emma nodded. She picked up her bag from the chair where she'd left it.
Then we watch, she said. We watch.
They went out into the cold together, and the day was already going gray at the edges, the light failing in the way of January afternoons in Montana when the sky decides it's done with you. 3 days later, at 9 in the morning, Renata called Emma's phone and said 4 words before Emma could say hello. "Check your email, now." Emma opened it on Cole's kitchen table with her coffee still hot beside her. The email was from an address she didn't recognize, a generic Gmail account, no name in the sender field. The subject line was blank. The body of the email contained no text. There was a single attachment, a PDF. She opened it. It was Emma's nursing school transcript, her undergraduate academic record, her first-year performance review from Harwick, dated 7 years ago. 3 letters of recommendation from supervisors she'd had during her early career, and a handwritten note on Harwick Medical Center letterhead, which she had never seen before, which bore the signature of the director who had preceded Marcus Pruitt. The note, dated 4 years ago, was addressed to the hospital's Board of Trustees. It read, in part, that the writer had concerns about the conduct of the incoming director of operations regarding the selection of affiliated physicians, and that he wished to place on record his recommendation that Alst's contract not be renewed pending an independent review of his billing practices. The note had never been acted on. The director who wrote it had retired 6 months later. Emma looked at the email. Then she looked at Cole. "Someone inside Harwick sent this," she said. Cole took the phone and read it. He read it twice. Then he looked at her with an expression she had not seen on him before. Not quite alarm, but close to it. "This note existed 4 years ago," Emma said. "Someone inside that hospital knew Alst was a problem 4 years ago and wrote it down, and it was buried." "Which means Pruitt knew," Cole said. "He came into that role and he found this note, and he made a decision." Emma stared at the screen. "Who sent this?" "I don't know," Cole said. "But whoever it is, they're inside the building and they've been holding this for a reason, and they chose right now to send it." "Why now?" Cole set the phone down carefully. "Because Pruitt is about to move," he said, "and whoever sent this wants us to know what we're dealing with before he does." He looked at her. "This isn't a disclosure. It's a warning." Emma looked at the email on the screen, the blank sender field, the blank subject line, the single attachment that rewrote the timeline of everything that had happened at Harwick Medical Center for the past 4 years. Her phone rang. It was Graft. She answered. "Ms. Voss," Graft said, "I need you and Mr. Maddox in my office in 2 hours. We've had a development." His voice had the particular quality she'd heard in it only once before, the controlled urgency of the January 2nd meeting, but tighter now, more compressed. "Marcus Pruitt resigned from Harwick Medical Center this morning, effective immediately. He has retained a criminal defense attorney." A pause. "And we have reason to believe he is attempting to destroy records before the investigation can compel their production." Emma stood up from the table. Cole was already reaching for his jacket. "We'll be there," she said. They were in Graff's office in 58 minutes. Cole drove and Emma sat with her phone in her lap reading the PDF attachment again, not because she'd missed something the first time, but because she needed to understand the full shape of it before she walked into that building. The note from Pruitt's predecessor, Director Ellison Marsh, she'd looked him up on the drive, retired 2021, now living in Tucson, was 4 paragraphs. It was careful and specific, and it had been buried in Harwick's internal records for 4 years, while Alst continued practicing and Pruitt continued protecting him, and the billing irregularities continued accumulating. Whoever had sent it had access to archived administrative files. That narrowed it considerably. Graff's office in the county seat of Dresser was on the 3rd floor of a building that looked different at 9 in the morning under urgency than it had on January 2nd. Koss was already at the conference table with her laptop open, and 2 additional staff members Emma hadn't seen before. Graff was standing when they came in, which he hadn't been the first time. "Sit down," he said. "We have about an hour before this gets more complicated." He told them what he knew in the compressed sequential way of someone who has already organized it internally and is now just transferring it. Pruitt had submitted his resignation to Harwick's Board of Trustees at 7:15 that morning, not by email, by physical letter, hand-delivered to the board chair's home address, which was unusual enough to register as deliberate. His criminal defense attorney, a woman named Sonia Hart from Missoula, had filed a notice of representation with the AG's office at 7:50. And at 8:20, Harwick's IT department had flagged an anomalous data access event on the administrative server, a bulk download of files from the archived administrative records going back 6 years, accessed through Pruitt's credentials, initiated at 6:40 a.m., 40 minutes before he delivered his resignation letter. He downloaded the files himself, Cole said. His credentials were used, Graff said. Whether it was him personally or someone acting with his login, we don't know yet. But the download included archived correspondence files, physician contract records, and the Board of Trustees communication log for the past 5 years. He paused. It also included the administrative archive folder where records from his predecessor's tenure are stored. Emma looked at Cole. The note, she said. Someone pulled the note from that archive this morning, Cole said. Either to destroy it or to get it out before it got destroyed, Graff said. He looked at Emma. Did you receive anything this morning? Any communication you weren't expecting? Emma placed her phone on the table and opened the email. Graff and Koss looked at it. Koss photographed the screen immediately with a work phone. Graff read the note twice, the same way Cole had, once for content, once for implication. The sender address, Graff said. Generic Gmail. No name, Emma said. We can subpoena the account data. It'll take time, but we'll get the registration information. He looked up. Whoever sent this accessed that archive before Pruitt's bulk download ran or during it. They pulled the note and sent it to you instead of letting it disappear into whatever Pruitt was planning to do with those files. He straightened. That's someone inside who made a choice this morning, under significant personal risk. Emma thought about Wen Ferris, the billing analyst who had called Iris Delacroix in December. She thought about the institutional awareness that existed inside a building, how people knew things, documented things, held things, and how much depended on whether anyone outside the building ever gave them a reason to act. What do we do about the bulk download? Cole asked. We already have a preservation order in place, Koss said. Filed the day we opened the formal investigation. Any destruction or removal of records subject to that order is obstruction. The preservation order covers all administrative and clinical records going back 7 years. She looked at Graff. The question is whether what he downloaded constitutes an attempt to remove rather than simply copy. His counsel will argue he was reviewing files in preparation for his defense, Graff said, which is technically legal if the files aren't individually covered by the preservation order. But the archive folder, specifically the predecessor correspondence files, those are covered. He looked at Emma. If Pruitt accessed and downloaded those files with the intention of destroying the Marsh note before we could compel production, that's obstruction. And the timestamp on the Gmail to you, 6:58 a.m., 12 minutes after the download began, may be the only reason we know the note existed. Because whoever sent it knew the download was happening, Emma said, and knew what it meant. Yes, Graff said. The room was quiet for a moment. Emma thought about the specific courage it required to be inside a building where a man like Pruitt was running, to watch him start deleting his tracks, and to pull one document out of the fire and send it to the person it was meant to protect. Anonymous. No acknowledgement, no guarantee of protection. Just a blank subject line and a single attachment, and the decision that some things shouldn't disappear. She thought about all the things that had tried to disappear. The chart entry at 2243. The nursing board notification that was never filed. The Marsh note from 2021. Her entire career coded into a flag and a background check system. None of it had disappeared. It had just needed someone to keep looking. What? Graff moved fast. By 11 a.m., his office had filed an emergency motion with the district court compelling Pruitt's immediate return of any downloaded files and prohibiting their destruction or transfer. The motion cited the preservation order and the timestamp evidence from the bulk download log. It was granted by noon. Pruitt's attorney, Sonia Hart, filed a response by 2 p.m. arguing the download was a protected legal preparation activity and that her client had not destroyed any documents. The response did not address the Marsh note or the Gmail. The AG's office read that absence as confirmation. Cole and Emma drove back to Garlow in the early afternoon. The sky had cleared slightly. Not warm, not bright, just a thin dilution of the January gray that made everything look slightly more resolvable. Marisol and Declan were at school, their second week back after the holiday, which Emma had gotten them into through the Garlow district after Cole had called a contact on the school board and explained the situation with the matter-of-fact specificity that seemed to work on every bureaucratic obstacle he encountered. "He's not going to run," Cole said, not taking his eyes off the road. "How do you know?" "Because Hart is good. If Pruitt were a flight risk, she'd have told him to stay quiet and she'd be managing the optics, not filing counter-responses at 2 p.m. She's still fighting, which means she thinks there's something to fight for, which means she thinks there's a deal to be made." He paused. "The AG will offer him a cooperation agreement in exchange for full disclosure on Ollist and the Board of Trustees members who knew about the billing arrangement. Pruitt will take it because it's the only thing that reduces his exposure from criminal to civil. And Alst? Alst has no one to cooperate against who's more valuable than himself." Cole kept driving. "He's the clinical end of the fraud, the billing fraud, the chart modification. Those originate with him. Pruitt is the administrator who enabled it, but Alst is the physician whose license made it possible. The board will pull his license and the AG will pursue criminal charges separately." Emma looked out the window at the landscape moving past. The flat, wide Montana winter, the pale sky, the occasional stand of trees dark against the snow. "What about my job?" she said. Cole was quiet for a moment. "Renata has a call with the nursing board tomorrow. The board's written determination," Vela said 10 business days, so somewhere around the 28th, "will almost certainly include a formal finding that the termination was procedurally defective. That triggers a mandatory review of the background flag." He glanced at her. "You'll have your license status restored. The flag will be removed or amended. You can work." "Where?" she said. Not despair, just the practical question. "Anywhere you want," he said. "In Garlow or out of it. You'd have documentation from the board, from the AG, and depending on how Harwick's new leadership handles the fallout, possibly a formal rehabilitation offer from the hospital itself." He paused. "You don't have to take it." "I know," she said. They drove for a while without talking. Emma thought about what she wanted, which was a question she hadn't had enough stability to seriously ask herself in months. She thought about the trauma floor at Harwick on a surge night, the specific pressured clarity of it, the way everything narrowed to what was in front of you, what the patient needed, what the next correct step was. She had been good at that. She was still good at it. She wanted to do it again, but she also thought about Petra, who was still working under the shadow of what had happened. About Gwen Ferris, who had called Iris Delacroix in December with billing records she wasn't supposed to have noticed. About the unnamed IT person who might or might not have pulled the Marsh note from a burning archive at 6:50 a.m. on a January morning. About all the people inside buildings like Harwick who saw things and held them and had nowhere to put them. She thought about what could have been different. If there had been a mechanism. If there had been somewhere to report that didn't lead directly to the person doing the harm. She kept that thought. The Montana Board of Medical Examiners issued its written determination on January 26th, 2 days ahead of schedule, which Renata told Emma was unusual and significant, meaning the board had not needed the full period to reach its conclusions. The determination was 14 pages. Emma read all of it at Cole's kitchen table with coffee going cold beside her. The board found that the nursing observation entries in Gerald Fowler's patient record had been modified after their original creation, based on the access log evidence and the authenticated photographic record of the original chart. It found that Dr. Raymond Alst's access of the record at 6:52 a.m. on November 15th, resulting in the removal of a nursing entry documenting clinical escalation, constituted tampering with a medical record in violation of Montana medical practice standards. It found that the counter-complaint filed by Alst against Emma Voss was not supported by evidence and was withdrawn by the complainant. It found that Harwick Medical Center had failed to comply with mandatory adverse action reporting requirements under the Montana Nurse Practice Act. On the final page, in language that was unusually direct for a regulatory determination, the board noted that Emma Voss's nursing documentation on the night in question reflected sound clinical judgment, appropriate escalation protocol, and professional conduct consistent with the highest standards of nursing practice. Emma read that sentence twice. Then she set the document down and sat with her hands around her cold coffee cup and looked at the window for a long moment. She had spent 14 months being managing grief, managing the hospital, managing the termination, managing $43 in a coat pocket on a concrete bench in 11-degree weather. She had spent the last 6 weeks being told her version of events was defective, fabricated, motivated by grief and instability and personal vendetta. She had been called unstable in a formal proceeding, and she had sat in that room and kept her hands flat on the table and not flinched. And now 14 pages from a regulatory board said what she had known in November when she picked up the phone and called Raymond Alst the second time at 22:43 and documented the call because she understood, even then, that her word alone would not be enough. Cole came into the kitchen from the back of the house and looked at the document on the table and then at Emma. "Good?" he said. "Yeah," she said. "Good." He poured himself coffee. He didn't make anything of the moment, which was the right instinct. Emma didn't need the moment to be made into anything. She needed it to be what it was. "Renata's filing the license restoration request today," Cole said. "She expects it to be processed within a week." He sat down. "The background flag will be amended to show the board determination. Any employer who pulls your record will see the finding." Emma nodded. She picked up her coffee, realized it was cold, stood up and poured it out and refilled it from the pot. A simple, ordinary sequence of actions that felt, this morning, like something she had earned. Raymond Alst surrendered his medical license on February 3rd. He did not do it voluntarily. The board's formal proceeding against him, separate from the determination, a full disciplinary hearing with his own counsel and a panel of 5, concluded after 2 days with a unanimous finding of unprofessional conduct, medical record falsification, and violation of the standard of care. The license suspension was immediate and indefinite, pending the outcome of the AG's criminal investigation. Alst's attorney read a prepared statement outside the hearing building that contained the words "deeply regrets" and committed to cooperating and looks forward to addressing these matters fully in the appropriate venue. The statement was 3 paragraphs. It did not mention Emma Voss, Gerald Fowler, Petra Sorrell, or any of the 3 prior incidents that the board's investigation had now traced back through Alst's case history and flagged for further review. Emma was not at the hearing. She was at Marisol's school for a parent-teacher conference, sitting in a small chair across from Marisol's teacher, who told her that Marisol was doing well, had made 2 new friends since the semester started, and had written a story for Language Arts about a dog named Ranger who could find people who were lost. Emma sat in the small chair and listened, and thought that some things happened at exactly the right time, and some things happened at the only time they could have, and it was not always possible to tell the difference. She found out about Alst's license when Renata texted her in the school parking lot afterward. She read the text, put her phone in her pocket, and drove home. Marcus Pruitt was formally charged on February 19th. The charges came from the AG's office after 6 weeks of investigation, and they were not minor. Federal wire fraud, healthcare fraud, conspiracy to obstruct a government investigation, and arising specifically from the bulk download of archived files on the morning of January 15th, tampering with evidence subject to a preservation order. Sonia Hart had negotiated hard, but there was a limit to what negotiation could accomplish when the evidence included access logs, LLC payment records, and a 4-year-old internal memo that had been pulled from a burning archive and emailed to the person it was written to protect. The cooperation agreement Pruitt eventually accepted covered Hart's narrowest prediction: partial cooperation regarding the billing structure in exchange for a reduced charge on 1 count. It did not eliminate the primary fraud charges. It did not eliminate the obstruction charge. The plea arrangement, which was finalized in late March, included a requirement that Pruitt provide full testimony regarding the Board of Trustees members who had been aware of the billing irregularities, which resulted in 2 additional individuals being named in a separate proceeding. Emma read the coverage in the Garlow Courier and in the Dresser Register, which had picked up the story in January and stayed with it. She read it the way she read most things now, carefully, completely, and without the specific grinding anxiety that had been her constant companion since November. The anxiety had not fully gone. She didn't expect it to. You don't spend 14 months in the kind of sustained pressure she had been under and come out the other side without carrying some version of it. But it had changed shape. It was no longer a weight pressing down on everything. It was just something she was aware of, like the compensated hip injury Cole walked with, present, acknowledged, not in control. She thought sometimes about what it would mean to say the system had worked. She didn't know if that was true or not. The system had worked, eventually, because Cole had known how to navigate it, and Renata had known how to argue inside it, and Graft had been willing to move, and Petra had been willing to hold, and Gerald had driven 4 hours on a January morning to sit in a chair and say what he knew. The system had not worked on its own. It had needed all of those things, all of those people, all at once. She wasn't sure that was the same as the system working, but she held on to what was true. The chart entry existed. Petra had photographed it. The access log was immutable. And a man named Ellison Marsh had written a note 4 years ago because he believed that some things should be on record even if no one ever acted on them, and he had been right. The anonymous Gmail account that had sent Emma the Marsh note was traced in mid-February through a subpoena to a registration address in Garlow. The account had been created on January 14th, the night before the hearing, and used once. The registration email led to a secondary account that had also been used once and then abandoned. The physical device used to send the message was never recovered. Graff told Emma the trace had dead-ended. He said it without visible frustration, which she read as acceptance. Whoever it was had covered themselves well enough to stay covered. Emma privately thought it was Wen Ferris. She had no evidence for this. She just thought about a junior billing analyst who had noticed an irregularity after 14 months, who had called Iris Delacroix in December, rather than looking away, who had been inside that building on the morning of January 15th when Pruitt started the download. Someone who understood what was in that archive because she had spent 14 months learning how Harwick's numbers worked. She never said this out loud. Some things were allowed to stay what they were. An unnamed act, done at personal risk, for no reward. She respected that. She understood it. Emma Voss went back to nursing on March 7th, not at Harwick. Harwick's new interim director had reached out through Renata in February with a formal letter of apology and an offer of reinstatement at a senior level, and Emma had read the letter twice and then called Renata and said she needed time to decide. Renata said take the time. Emma took 3 weeks, and at the end of them she knew the answer, which was that she was not ready to walk back into that specific building, and she might never be. And that was not weakness. It was information about herself that she was allowed to act on. She took a position at Thorngate Community Hospital, a mid-sized public facility in Dresser, on the trauma floor. The hire went through in 8 days because the nursing director, a woman named Claudette Oren, who had worked trauma floors for 20 years, read Emma's board determination and her case history and called Emma directly, rather than going through HR. "I read what you did on that floor in November," Claudette said on the call. "I read your escalation documentation. I read the second call at 22:43. She paused. "That's exactly what you're supposed to do. I need nurses who do exactly what they're supposed to do." Emma's first shift was a Sunday overnight. She drove herself. She parked in the staff lot and sat in the car for 4 minutes before she got out, which was not confidence but was movement in the right direction. She badged in at the staff entrance and found her locker and changed into scrubs and stood at the edge of the trauma floor for a moment before stepping onto it. It smelled the same, antiseptic and latex and the specific institutional air of a building that never fully sleeps. The sounds were the same, monitors, the low murmur of a floor that was running at 2/3 capacity, a phone ringing at the nurse's station that someone picked up on the second ring. She stepped onto the floor and went to work. The first patient she triaged that night was a 44-year-old man who had come in through the ER with chest pain and was trying to convince everyone it was indigestion. Emma went through the assessment with him: vitals, history, the specific quality of the pain, radiation pattern, onset, and by the end of it she knew it was not indigestion and said so clearly to the attending who came to review, and the attending ordered the workup she recommended. And the troponin came back elevated, and the patient was moved to cardiac monitoring, and he was in a cath lab by 3 a.m. She documented everything: the assessment, the escalation, the physician contact, the response and timeline. She documented it with the same precision she had always used, because she understood now in a way she had not fully understood before that the documentation was not just clinical record. It was testimony. It was the account that survived when other things were changed around it. It was the thing that could not be unmade. She drove home at 7:30 a.m. in the pale early light of a Montana March morning, and Marisol was already up making toast in Cole's kitchen, and Declan was in the hallway in his socks throwing a tennis ball for Ranger, who retrieved it with patient devotion and no diminished dignity. Cole was at the table with his coffee and his legal pad. He looked up when she came in. "Good night," he said. "Busy," she said. She hung her keys on the hook by the door.
Her hook now, she'd been given one in October, and it had become hers the way small things become yours over time without announcement. One troponin, 2 lacerations, a kid with a broken wrist who cried the entire time until I gave him the purple cast, and then he stopped. Smart kid. She poured coffee. She sat at the table across from him. Ranger abandoned the tennis ball and came to put his head on her knee, which he did most mornings when she came home from shift. I want to do something else, Emma said. In addition to the floor. Cole looked at her. A support program, she said, for medical workers who are being pushed out. Not counseling. I'm not a therapist. More like what you did for me. Navigation, documentation, knowing who to call. She wrapped her hands around her coffee cup. There are other Emmas. There were before me and there are right now, in hospitals in this state, in hospitals everywhere, with documentation that proves what they're saying and no mechanism to get it in front of the right people. She paused. I want to build the mechanism. Cole looked at her for a moment. The legal pad was in front of him. He turned it toward her. He had already written, in his small compressed handwriting, a list of 6 organizational structures, 2 nonprofit models, a county-level advocacy framework, a partnership model with the nursing board, a legal clinic partnership structure, and a peer support network model. Emma looked at the list. How long have you been thinking about this? She said. Since the day after the board determination, he said. Iris Delacroix mentioned she'd been looking for a clinical advocacy component for the Oversight Committee's work. Renata has 2 colleagues who do medical licensing defense pro bono who are looking for referral sources. He paused. The structure exists. It just needs someone to run it who understands what the inside of that situation feels like. Emma looked at the list, then at Cole, then back at the list. You were waiting for me to say it, she said. I wanted it to be your idea, he said, because it needs to be. Because the day comes when this is harder than you expected, and you need it to have been yours from the beginning. Emma looked at the legal pad. She thought about the bench in the town square, the garbage bags, the $43. She thought about the way help had arrived without conditions. A warm house, food, and no price attached. She thought about what it would have meant to have had a mechanism. Someone who knew how to read documentation, who knew which board received which complaint, who knew that a nursing board notification failure was a procedural defect that could be argued in a proceeding. She thought about all the people sitting on benches in various forms right now, with documentation in their hands and no one to show it to. Okay, she said, let's build it. Marisol came to the table with 2 pieces of toast and set one in front of Emma without being asked. Declan came in from the hallway with the tennis ball in one hand and sat down next to Ranger. The kitchen had the specific texture of a weekday morning that has been lived in enough times to feel ordinary, which was its own kind of miracle that Emma did not take for granted. The Voss Maddox Advocacy Program. They argued about the name for 3 weeks, and Emma eventually won by pointing out that Cole's name on the letterhead gave it immediate credibility with the military and law enforcement communities she wanted to reach. Opened formally in June, operating out of a small rented office in Dresser with 2 volunteer coordinators and a partnership agreement with Renata's firm and 2 additional attorneys. It was not smooth. The first month was administrative chaos. The intake process needed to be rebuilt twice. The referral network took longer to establish than projected because 2 partner organizations had internal approval processes that moved at the pace of large institutions, which was slow. Emma came home from the office one Thursday in July and told Cole it was harder than the trauma floor, and Cole said that anything worth building was, and Emma said that was an annoying thing to say, and he said he knew, and she laughed, which was the right outcome. By the end of the first year, they had worked with 31 healthcare workers across Montana who had faced institutional retaliation, adverse action, or documentation disputes. 11 of those cases resulted in license restoration or record amendment. 4 resulted in formal complaints against facilities that led to regulatory review. 2 resulted in AG referrals. Emma took every intake call personally for the first 6 months. She sat with people on the phone the way Cole had sat with her at that kitchen table. No performance, just questions, specific ones, oriented toward the next decision. What do you have? What can you document? What did you see and when? She learned to hear in someone's voice when they were telling the short version because they'd been told too many times that the details didn't matter. And she learned to tell them the details matter. Every timestamp, every phone call, every chart entry. Say all of it.
She was still working trauma at Thorngate on alternating weeks. Claudette Oren had accommodated the schedule without complaint, which Emma suspected was because Claudette understood that a nurse who had something beyond the floor to anchor her was a more sustainable nurse in the long run. Emma had worked with enough burned-out colleagues to know that the people who lasted were the ones who had a why that survived the hard nights. She had more than one why now. The following March, 14 months after Christmas night in the town square, Emma was asked to speak at a nursing advocacy conference in Helena. She almost said no. Public speaking was not something she had ever wanted to do, and the idea of standing in front of a room full of people and talking about what had happened to her felt like performing grief she had already processed. Renata told her to say yes. Claudette told her to say yes. Cole said it was her decision, and when she asked what he said he thought the 31 people the program had worked with had probably all wondered if anyone would ever stand up and say what the system had done to them out loud, in a room where it mattered. She said yes. The conference was on a Thursday in March, a clear day for once. The sky above Helena actually blue, rather than the compressed gray of a Montana winter. She drove herself. She sat in the parking lot of the convention center for 6 minutes before she went inside, which was slightly better than the 4 minutes outside Thorngate on her first shift, and she counted that as growth. She spoke for 22 minutes without notes. She had tried writing notes and found that the notes turned her account into a presentation, and she wanted it to be something else. Not a presentation, just the truth, said out loud, in sequence, the way she had told it to Cole at that kitchen table in December while he wrote in small compressed handwriting on a yellow legal pad. She told them about the bench. She told them about the $43. She told them about the chart entries at $22.43 and about the second version of the chart that had appeared by morning, and about sitting across from Marcus Pruitt in a termination meeting while he used the word contributed 4 times and never said her name. She told them about the hearing room and Gerald Fowler sitting with his cane across his knees and saying, "I'm not here to prove the documentation. I'm here to tell you what was done with my injury." She told them about Petra, without identifying her, and about the anonymous email with a blank subject line and a single attachment that had arrived at 6:58 a.m. on a January morning. She told them about the determination, about March 7th and the trauma floor and the purple cast and the troponin. And then she said the thing she had been turning over for 14 months, the thing that had no clean articulation, but that she was going to try anyway, because the room was full of people who deserved to hear someone try. She said, "The hardest part wasn't being fired. It wasn't sitting on that bench. It wasn't the hearing or the countercomplaint or any of the specific things that happened. The hardest part was the period before any of that, the period when I had already been told, by the people in that building and by every system I tried to access, that my version of events didn't exist, that what I documented wasn't real, that my judgment and my memory and my professional record were all subordinate to whatever narrative the institution had decided to write." She paused. "And the thing I want you to hear, the thing I wish someone had said to me in that period, is that being told your version doesn't exist is not evidence that it doesn't. It is evidence that someone needs it not to. Those are very different things, and the difference is worth fighting for." The room was quiet, in the way that rooms get when something lands without ceremony. She didn't wait for applause. She just said, "Thank you," and stepped back from the podium. Cole was in the parking lot when she came out. He had driven up separately that morning because she'd needed to come early, and he had Declan's school pickup, which Petra's husband had covered in the end, but which had been in question until the morning. He was leaning against the truck with his hands in his jacket pockets, Ranger in the truck bed, because Ranger had reached the age where car trips required an actual bed to lie in rather than just a surface. Emma came across the parking lot and didn't say anything for a moment. Cole didn't ask how it went. She reached the truck and leaned against it beside him and looked at the Helena skyline. Not much of one, but a horizon and a blue sky above it, and the mountains visible in the distance the way Montana mountains are always visible, reminding you of scale. "Declan called me while I was in there," she said. "I know, he called me too. He found a frog in the backyard." "In March." "Brave frog." Emma looked at the mountains for a moment. "I don't want to move," she said. "From Garlow. From Aldrin Street." She paused. "I know it started as your house." Cole was quiet for a moment. "It's not just my house anymore," he said. "It stopped being that a while ago." She looked at him. When? He thought about it. Actually thought about it, in the way he considered things. Not performing consideration, but actually running through the question. When Marisol put the drawing on the refrigerator, he said. That was when. Emma looked at him for another moment. Then she looked back at the mountains. Ranger's getting old, she said. He's fine. He's slowing down. He's pacing himself, Cole said. He's always been smarter than both of us. Emma smiled at the mountains. It was not a performance. It was just what her face did. There was a version of this story where she had stayed on that bench, where no one had stopped, where the night had continued in the direction it was going, where the garbage bags and the $43 and the frozen town square were the end of one chapter with nothing beginning after it. She knew that version existed because she had been in it, and the distance between that version and this parking lot in Helena in March with the blue sky and the mountains and the man beside her was not made of luck. It was made of specific decisions by specific people to do specific things rather than walk past. Petra's decision to photograph a screen at 11:15 p.m. because something felt wrong. Ellison Marsh's decision to write a note that no one might ever read. Wen Ferris making a call in December. Gerald Fowler driving 4 hours because he was done being quiet. Cole stopping at a bench in 11-degree weather because Ranger stopped first, and Cole understood that the dog was usually right. And her own decision, at 22:43 on a November night, to pick up the phone and call the second time and then document the call with full timestamp because she understood that her word alone might not be enough. It had not been enough. Alone. None of them had been enough. Alone. That was the point. That was the whole point. You document what you see. You find the person who knows how to read it. You hold when holding is all there is, and you keep going, not because the system is designed to protect you. Often it isn't. But because the truth has a specific weight, and documented truth has more, and there are people in this world who know how to use that weight if you can stay on your feet long enough to hand it to them. The women and men who are sitting right now in some version of what Emma had been sitting in, on their own benches, in their own forms, with their own documentation that no one was reading, they deserve to know that the bench was not the end. That being erased is not the same as not existing. That the distance between what you were told and what is true is exactly the distance worth fighting. Emma had learned this the hard way, which was the only way some things can be learned. She intended to spend the rest of her career making sure fewer people had to learn it alone. She pushed off the truck. Let's go home, she said. Cole pushed off beside her. Ranger's head appeared over the side of the truck bed, alert, ears forward, watching them with the particular attention of an animal who understands departure and arrival and has strong opinions about both. Okay, Cole said. Let's go home. They got in the truck and drove out of the parking lot and onto the highway heading west, and the mountain stayed visible in the mirror until the road bent and the hills came up, and then it was just the open road ahead of them, going back to Garlow, going back to Aldrin Street, going back to the half-unpacked house that had become, in the space of one winter, exactly where they belonged.